luckily for me, I had a thirst for knowledge that I actually read a book or two outside of school and learned some things on my own, but a lot of people don't have that drive or even care to do that.
Clap on. Mage podcast here. It's the 29th of December. Oh, it is the 28th. Yeah, you just said 28th of December, 2000 and I think it's 2012 still. The end of the world happened a couple days ago, so we're floating around some parallel universe, according to Joe Rogan.
You know, actually, the end of the world is when we go over the fiscal cliff, so we're still a little bit ahead of it.
That's something we got to talk about too, is this fiscal cliff. But we'll start off here. I'm with Jake Duesenberg, and you know, if you check out this Mage channel where all this stuff's posted, the day that I met Jake was the Kurt Bills interview, wasn't it the first time?
Yeah, I met you at the state fair.
Yeah, when I interviewed Kurt Bills, you can check it on the channel at the state fair. I wanted to be, because Kurt was the opposite of Amy Klobuchar. The dude was just working hard at his booth, like just getting out, talking to people. And by the way, I'm not talking smack here about Klobuchar in the sense that, you know, she's big name, been in the deal.
Well, she was outside of her stand. I even went up and talked to her about the Fed there. So
well, yeah. I mean, I had to pretend. I had to pretend
for that 10 minutes.
Shake her
10 minutes
hand,
she was out there. I got a chance to bring up the Fed with her.
All I'm saying is, you could tell Kurt Bills. I mean, he's a teacher, and he was just putting in yeoman's work out there trying to get out. And so I was like, I got to interview him. And I think you were someone else approached me with you. And then I basically said, here's who I am. I want to ask questions. And then you were actually hospitable. And you were like, I think Kurt would do that. No problem.
I got you that interview, didn't I? And that
cheers,
just,
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And so...
Kurt, you know, had seen some bad interviews with the media. And so I think they're probably a little leery of doing just any kind of interview. But you know what?
He didn't seem that leery. He seemed a little nervous.
His staffers would be, and that makes sense because, you know, people can do whatever they want with audio and video. But quite frankly, guys like you, independent journalists, do you go by that designation?
That's probably exactly what I go by most of the time now.
You guys are almost the best truth tellers, the defenders of liberty, and free and open media. I love what you guys do, and Kurt would be the same way. And as long as I can tell you're not some wacko liberal trying to get him to say that he wants to legalize heroin,
I am a liberal, but I'm a classical liberal. That's a huge, yeah. It's a tough word. That's like the worst. Yeah. Conservative and liberal are words that I try to just erase from my vocabulary.
I know.
That's why I say like neo-lib.
Progressive collectivist. Collectivist is my favorite because they group everything in the collectives and then they supply the collective with whatever it is, their benefits, and that's how they keep getting reelected.
You know, words that people use to describe like the neoliberal that I approve of are collectivist, statist. I don't know about it. Those two are my go-to ones at least. Yeah. And liberal, when I hear liberal and someone wants me to participate in the conversation, my brain can't help but immediately start like just changing the direction and then going into word definitions. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, kind of like what we're doing now, but right away.
It doesn't do much good because the average person, the average voter does not care, and they need to hear the conservative, the Republican, the liberal, and the Democrat. That's kind of how they do it. In fact, I think, I know I've got it somewhere up here. I've got Milton Friedman's, Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom here because we're in my office right now, and I've got
I like your book collection, looking around. I have a lot of these books. You got Nullification, is that Tom Woods?
Yeah, it's Tom Woods.
Okay.
I've got a lot of Austrian authors, of course, but...
you got Road to Serfdom somewhere in here, I'm sure.
Of course I got Road to Serfdom.
And The Fed, I read that one. Yeah. And then I saw Dereliction of Duty, so if you're listening to us here, Dereliction of Duty, look that one up. That's about Clinton, and it's the dude who carried the nuclear football, literally the briefcase with the nuclear codes, and he just wrote a smack talk book about Clinton. And if you read that book, the dude went in there, I think, and they asked him who he voted for, and he was embarrassed, but he couldn't lie. And he said, I didn't vote for anybody in the last election. And Clinton liked it so much that he didn't even vote. That's why he appointed the guy. Yeah. So kind of a weird deal there. But anyways, go ahead on this one.
So I think this is copyright 2002, so it's maybe third, fourth edition of Milton Friedman's great work, Capitalism and Freedom. And no, it's 40th anniversary edition. So there's many different revisions here, and they even say in the front that when he refers to liberal, he's referring in the classical sense, because obviously by the time...
So he has to, like, elaborate, just so you know.
Because you read the original text and you see liberal, and the average voter today is like, wait, well, liberals don't believe in, this kind of capitalism, I think one of the points in that book is licensing, and almost any modern-day liberal is going to think, oh, yeah, if you're running a beauty salon, you need to be licensed by the state, right? And it's an argument that Milton Friedman, because the classical liberal would say no, that's a barrier to entry in the marketplace. So it's a very interesting thing that.
Are you reading Peter Schiff's new book, or have you?
Well, yeah, I've actually got 2 copies that we're going
to
sign.
How did I not see it? Yeah.
Peter and I think a lot alike.
In reading that, he was talking about, I forget what state it was, but the florist license. Did you read that?
Oh, yeah.
He goes into the history
of
florists, and he's like, well, who do you think created the florist license? Well, obviously the biggest, most experienced florist.
That's how it works.
And it's the most easy analogy is to think about, there's a license for everything. And Doug Stanhope, I don't know if you listen to Doug Stanhope, the comedian, but he's got so much stuff about freedom, and he's super vulgar and to the point, but he's sometimes the most effective guy for me as far as like comprehending liberty. And he's just like talking about, you think you're free, you need, go catch a fish, so you need a fishing license, but you don't have any money, so you got to go get a job and pay into the social security system.
That's right. No, it's a very interesting conversation, but the average voter and person just doesn't. I think they need to hear that liberal and conservative divide, even though really it's kind of fictitious. In fact, Democrats and Republicans, there's not a whole lot of difference when you get down to it. This fiscal cliff thing, they're going to end up voting for a solution that they created they created this problem. They're going to have a solution last minute, or maybe they wait a little bit after the New Year, but they're going to come up with a solution. They always get together, they work through these things, and what happens is the people that believe in limited government lose, but the people that want the state to grow, and state here I mean the federal government, it's going to grow. We're not going to reduce spending at all. And if we do, it's going to be so minute that it's not going to make any difference.
What freaks me out is, just to get in a little bit into my professional life here, but a lot of times we'll go to conventions, meetings, hobnob deals, and then everybody gets into politics, and I'm in the construction industry.
Yep.
And so I would say, even if there was someone who voted for Obama, and by the way, I barely ever meet anybody who's not a two-party person in their mind and body and soul and all of the above. Just live it, breathe it, die it.
Yep.
And even if someone voted for Obama in this last election or the one before, they would never admit it at these functions.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is there's a lot of rhetoric about when Congress, and I'm doing bunny ear quotes right now for the listeners, when they pass something or they work together or they compromise, those 3 things, at these functions, it's always like, man, at least they got together. It's not perfect, but at least they got together. And then when nothing gets passed, they just bitch and moan when nothing gets passed because another bunny ear's getting done.
Yeah.
And then I have to start just shutting up and changing the subject, because a lot of times I get lured into these political conversations, and then it's right away everyone looks at me like I got a tinfoil hat on.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting there really, just because you wrote, we got hundreds of thousands of pages of legislation.
Yeah.
Just because you pass a new one, which is going to increase some sort of spending somewhere, whether it's state or federal level.
Or if it's not spending indirectly, it's a tax on businesses because they have to comply with the new regulation and those thousands of pages. Either way, it's hurting us. Whether it's a spending problem or if it's just more regulation. It's what they do. It's what they're really good at. And it's what justifies their job, too. If they don't have bills, then they're not an effective legislator.
I think that's the story of everything, whether it's the ATF in Waco or whether it's the drug war with the DEA or anything like that, or whether it's the FDA, and then get into Monsanto talk. But I think so much of this world in general, when it's a collective, not just a government collective, it could be any collective, it could be your job.
Yep.
But it's you have to master your self-justification for what you do.
That's right.
And if you don't master that, the guy next to you is going to master it better, and therefore, statistically, he's going to have a higher chance of keeping his job, aka his livelihood and his lifestyle. And so I just think of the city employee, for example, is a microcosm of basically the federal government.
Right.
Is the city employee in comparison to someone who works for a private sector company has a completely different mindset every day he or she goes into work.
Right.
Because the justification for what they do is not quantifiable in the same way it is for someone like me in like a sales department area of a company.
Right.
Where it's purely quantifiable on how much value, based on your skill set and your performance, those two things mixed together, are you going to bring into the system. And I think about like the ideas of liberty being manifest in, like, let's say the colonies and stuff in the Revolutionary War. And the classical liberal, the Thomas Jefferson liberal sense to me was like, okay, government's bad, liberty's good, because anything that restricts our liberty is bad. So fundamentally, it was like Jefferson was an anarchist fundamentally, but I always call him a functioning minarchist, because you're going, okay, I'll play the social contract game enough to just form a system to protect individual liberty.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's kind of like everyone's self-justification for participating in a state.
Yeah.
You know, and that was 250 plus years
and that's
ago.
not the conversation anymore, obviously. Cause
No.
It's 180 from that, but that's a very valid point. I think what we need is some consultants at every level of government. We'll bring in the two Bobs, and everyone's got to justify their job.
What would you say you do here?
Yeah, what would you say you do here? You work for the soil and water? You're the dog catcher? I mean, it's a joke what these guys do, and I've seen it. I mean, the military is full of fraud, waste, and abuse, but I would venture to say it's probably the more efficient use of government funds, but still, I mean, it's a bureaucracy. It's going to have a lot of waste. In fact, that happens in the free market system. Corporations do the same thing. They get so big and they have pretty much wasted jobs.
Hold on. Let me jump in though. You just said the corporations and the free market system, when a corporation is a pseudo free market hybrid, isn't it?
Yeah, well, corporations are a result of some free market capitalism. Because they'll just produce a product or a service better than others.
But a company is free market, whereas a corporation is less free market than a company, wouldn't you say? Well, a corporation can subsidize its losses based on the state's participation.
Yeah, but we're getting on a different argument. We both definitely agree with this crony capitalism society that we have now. My point here was, a company like me, there's not a lot of fraud or a lot of waste in a small firm like me or your mom and pop shop, because their bottom line is, I mean, they're just barely making ends meet. Where these big corporations, you know, they're going to, after time, have a lot of waste. And, you know, in recessionary periods, it's very common for these people to cut some of that waste. And unfortunately, sometimes it's government that ends up causing this.
But you got an Obama tax waiver, right?
Yeah.
Right. I saw a bumper sticker. I'll probably mess up the wording, but it said something like, last year I paid more taxes than GE. For all the tax waivers. Yeah. Well, all right, let's get on this beer, because we're about to pour.
So that's why you came over. You want to talk about beer, right?
Well, I have to talk about beer because I know every subject that we get into, we'll just get back into how it's transitioned to be a less liberty-bearing institution, no matter what we get on.
Beer is a good conversation for liberty, too, and crony capitalism, in case you didn't know that.
Go on.
It's a very interesting subject.
Go on.
Which I researched quite a bit, because I have a concept brewery already designed called. I own North Star Brewing Company here in Minnesota.
North Star Brewing.
North Star Brewing. I own that name.
How do you spell that? N-O.
North Star. Just north. Like we're the North Star.
I didn't know
state.
You said Nord.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Northeast, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I thought there was North Star something. Anyways, all right. So keep going.
So the beer industry is dominated by the three big guys, right? You got Budweiser, which sells 1 out of every 2 beers. It's a Budweiser product. Even if it's not Budweiser or Bud Light, you know, it's a Heineken, or it's, Heineken, or I'm sorry, not Heineken, like a Rolling Rock. A Rolling Rock's owned by Budweiser. So 1 of every 2 beers in the United States is going to be a Budweiser product. You have Miller and Coors, and those 3 big companies.
No, this is just in the U.S., right?
This is the U.S. market, beer market. They own 80% of the beer market. About 15% of the beer market then is imports. You know, a lot of people are drinking Newcastle and Guinness.
It's only 15% is imports?
That's a pretty big market segment, though.
I believe it.
Yeah. So that remaining 5% is your craft breweries, like
I just picked this up.
Tivoli.
This is Lucky U IPA from Tivoli, which says it's made in Breckenridge.
Okay.
So
in Denver is Colorado's a big brewing scene. In fact, their New Belgium brewery is a very successful brewery.
And that's not owned by anybody else, right?
Right, that's a...
Because Ranger's like one of my favorite beers in the world.
Okay, that's IPA, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I like Fat Tire myself.
Yep.
I think it's a very good ale.
A little nutty.
Yeah, so anyhow, 5% of the market is the craft brewery.
Right.
Craft beer meaning something that's a little bit more artistically designed than your typical cold lager that Budweiser and Miller and Coors make. So this 5% segment, the largest company in there is the Boston Beer Company, which makes Sam Adams.
Okay.
And we live in Minnesota. Almost anyone can get a Sam Adams if you go to a restaurant or a bar. They own just under 1%, and they're a publicly traded company.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So that's how big dominant the big companies are. Now, one of the biggest growing segments of the beer industry are the craft breweries. In fact, I don't know much about this brewery, so they might be something in the last 5 years.
I have no idea. That's why I picked it up, because I hadn't had this before.
So where this idea of capitalism comes in is, why are the big guys so big? Well, you got to go back in beer American history. Go back to Prohibition. We actually outlawed the making and sale of beer, right?
Yep.
And that was overturned, and so it left up the states to determine the beer laws. And one big law that didn't get changed was until, I think, 1970, somewhere in the 70s, people couldn't even brew their own beer at home. It was illegal to do home brew.
I didn't know that.
In fact, I think there's one.
I knew about the liquor, though.
There's one, if not two states on the books. I don't quote me on this. I think it's Louisiana. It's still illegal to home brew beer. So
you know if they enforce that at all?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know how they would. It's
crazy.
It's like gambling, a poker game at night, right? But needless to say, you probably can't open a homebrew shop, because if you want a homebrew here in Minnesota, you go over to one of the two brew shops here in the Twin Cities, and you buy your grain or your extract or however you brew. I was always an all grain brewer, so
I haven't been there yet.
Okay,
I've just done the malt extract, so I'm excited because this next summer I'm gonna do all grain.
Oh, all
so maybe
grain
I'll buy you some
blast.
beer. You can coach me.
There you go. So how would you ever start a beer company if you can't, develop a recipe? I mean, imagine a cook that it's illegal to ever cook at your house. You can't ever turn on a stove or an oven and cook something. How would you ever open up a restaurant? You would have no idea what you're doing. So that's part of the protectionism of the big companies, because the big ones were already in business. They emerged out of Prohibition. Some of them survived by selling root beer, but whatever or the non-alcoholic beer. But they emerged out of Prohibition. They're the big guys. And no one else can really experiment with recipes, so you don't have that. Well, then those laws get overturned, and all of a sudden you get companies like the Brooklyn Brewery in the 80s that, hey, I can make beer that's far better tasting. I'm a world traveler, and I've tasted German beer, or I've gone to Belgium, or I've gone to England, and I've tasted beer that's nothing like this. Watered down, pale lager that dominates the market. Because it's crappy beer. It really is. And the reason they sell Budweiser and Coors and Miller Lite cold is because you wouldn't want to taste that beer at a room temperature.
Right.
It's going to taste like crap.
Right,
it's crap beer. A lot of it's brewed with rice. So
whereas, like, if you had a steak and someone poured you a 60-degree Fat Tire to sip on, it would still be fine.
Yeah, and
it would be delicious.
The darker the beer, usually the
warmer you want to
Absolutely.
Serve it. I don't know if you knew this, I used to bartend in Ireland.
Oh, really?
2006 for 4 months. I lived out there, and everyone would ask me how I drank American beer, and I say, "Dude, I don't." And then I'd say, "Hold on, there are these beers coming out now that would blow your mind." And I say, "They're some of the best beers in the world." I say, "No, they're not as good. They're not as good." And I say, "All right, but they're usually made in the very small craft selection, the small microbrew style."
Right.
And they just couldn't believe it because they didn't get them over there.
Yeah.
But then I called him my uncle, but he must have been like my 8th cousin or whatever. He was the guy who lived on a cattle farm in the hills.
Oh, cool.
And so we'd go in and drink Guinness if I did work on the farm. I'd pull weeds for the cattle and stuff like that at night after we worked in a recycling center during the day that they owned. Then we come back to the farm. They cook dinner, and sometimes I go do farm work, mow the lawn, pull weeds, whatever. Yeah. And then if I did farm work, we'd go into the pub, and it was the hottest summer in 2006 that Ireland had in a while. And so it would be like, you'd wake up in the morning, and you'd be super cold, and I'd have to put on a hoodie because I lived a couple kilometers from the Irish Sea on the east side, just an hour north of Dublin. It was called Drogheda. And so the sea breeze would come up the hills and it would just hit your bones and you would be so cold. And I'm like, I'm a Minnesotan, I can handle it, but we don't have a sea breeze like blowing through our clothes. Your clothes are never get dry either. They get like 90% dry. You can always feel a little dampness. But anyways, then during the day it would get so hot. So right after work, he'd always say, oh, we're stopping for a pint. And we'd say, okay. And he would pull up to a different pub every single day after work. And it was like a 30-minute drive. So literally I saw 100 pubs in a summer or something. But he was a Budweiser guy.
Oh, was he really?
He was from the month, like the summer months. He drank Guinness. He loved his Guinness too. But in the summer months, he thought Budweiser was like as good as it gets. And for American beer, I actually kind of prefer Budweiser because it's 50% rice.
Yeah.
And so if there's something about like if you're at a ball game and they have just crap beer and you have domestics and then of course all the domestic lights.
Yep.
And they're all the lager style, I'll just pick a Budweiser.
Oh, really?
I will. Just, I don't know what it is.
I hate Budweiser.
Do you?
But, I mean, obviously people drink it, but I'm convinced they do so well because of those three big ones. They spend over $1 billion in advertising and marketing, especially in the sports
industry. They do more than
industry.
everybody?
Oh, yeah. Big.
Well, you know what? How much do you think of that as Bud Light? Most of that probably, right?
That's right. Yeah, watered down crappy beer.
The best part about going to St. Cloud State, man, is all my friends, we all bartended.
Yeah.
Like all of my best friends I know just from working at the bars. And my roommate, one of my best friends, he was a bouncer across the street at the other bar, all this stuff. There's one like lore or conversational piece that I would never participate in, but everyone does but me. And it's they would argue over is Bud Light better, Miller Lite, or is Mick Golden Light better. And they all have these strong opinions. And every time guys would start talking to us, I would just sit there and laugh, like, aside to the conversation. I didn't want to participate in it. Because to me, it was like arguing, if you'd rather drink pee or eat poop or something. Like, it was just...
No, I don't want to sound like a beer snob, because that's kind of where this conversation usually goes with people talking about this.
I'm
not a beer snob. If you like the rice taste and, a light lager like Grain Belt. I like Grain Belt beer, and it is in that light lager category. They brew with corn, and there's something about the corn that I actually like in the brewing process. So I am a fan of Grain Belt. I'll drink Grain Belt anytime I go to Target Field.
Really?
But, and their Northeast is a very good beer. It's an amber lager. So I'm not a beer snob. Whatever you like is the best. But my point here is the reason we didn't have choices, because right now America's got the best beer. Hands down. I mean, I've been to Bavaria.
I don't know. You think so?
I've been to Bavaria. Listen,
I haven't been to Bavaria, though.
I've been to Bavaria, and I love Dunkelweizen. I love your
Franzis Conner is one of my favorite beers.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
I've been. Their bocks are great, but listen, America now brews every type of beer, geographically.
True.
And we experiment like no one's ever done before. Raison d'etre made by Dogfish Head.
I think you're probably right on that.
Spices and raisins and crazy stuff what we're doing right now. I mean, look at Leinenkugels has got one with lemonade and berries and
yeah, but that's all gimmicky.
But that's
gimmicky.
But I mean, you see what I'm saying? Is
yeah, I do.
There's so many different tastes.
I
mean, America's got the best beer because we got so many choices. But why is that? Well, we allowed home brewing, which brings in the innovative spirit of America, which is what I love about America. Is we have innovators, we have entrepreneurs, and they come up with a better way to make something that everyone likes, because beer is very well liked in America and actually around the world in the history of the world. And so we've experimented, but there are laws in place that kept us from doing it. Another law that actually forbids the small guy is something called the 3-tier system. And a lot of people
don't know about this.
So this is real interesting. And Minnesota, actually, of all states, is a leader in bringing back capitalism in the beer market, and it's a lot to do with Surly and small breweries like Fulton. Mm-hmm. But typically, states have something called the 3-tier system, and this is the big point behind this is the Beer Distributors of America, which basically contributes to everyone's campaign. Even good people like what I always like Michelle Bachmann on economic issues, but she gets money from these people, but they don't understand it. So I mean, take the money and whatnot. It's a state's issue. But here's what the 3-tier system is. If you brew beer, you're the brewer, right? Or you're the manufacturer.
I do know about this. Keep going though. Yeah.
And you and I are the end user. Now we can either buy a bottle of beer at a grocery store, or at a liquor store, or we could go to a pub and we can get a pint of beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're the end user. The 3-tier system brings in a middleman between you and I and the manufacturer. They bring in a middleman called the distributor, meaning that the brewery cannot sell to us directly.
Right.
They have to use a distributor. They can't actually take it to the end user or even take it to the liquor store themselves. They have to go through a distributor who's licensed by the state.
Sounds like the mafia now, doesn't it?
Yeah, right?
Doesn't it sound like that?
So this is capitalism 101. A barrier to entry. So say I'm a small guy and I'm just starting out and I want to self-distribute my own beer because, no one's going to care about my beer. Because you got to imagine if 80% of the beer is the big three, who are they going to care about? They're going to care about the big threes. That's their biggest clients and they're going to distribute their beer.
Right.
So you're trying to fight with these big three. You're just not going to be able to do it. So you need to self-distribute. Now, Minnesota's got a caveat, like I think it's 7,000 barrels annual production that you can self-distribute.
Oh.
But until 2 years ago, and North Star was behind this, we were one of the signed-on breweries to do this, was to change a law that allowed us to sell from a brewery directly to the end user. And Surly was the big muscle behind this because Surly wanted to start this $23 million project, big new brewery, where they want to operate as a brew pub, meaning that they sold their beer off their premises, but they also want to sell it on their premise to the end user.
Yep.
And it had to be a state law that changed. Luckily, Minnesota did it because everyone likes beer. And
it was, I remember when that changed too, because wasn't Fulton...
Fulton was behind it too, yeah.
Because I was going to say, since they're so close to the target field, I remember when the paper actually gave us some good coverage and stuff, that's what one of the factors was come on, man, like you're going to pregame for a Twins game, why not go to Fulton? They're a block away, and they make really quality beer, but this stupid law is like, nope, you got to use the distributor, God, that just... I remember the 3-tier system now.
It's a great case study of basically what Milton Friedman talks about in Capitalism and Freedom. And I'm a big Milton Friedman fan. I'm an Austrian scholar, Austrian economist. I would differ from the Chicago School on monetary policy, but I don't think anyone made a better argument about some of these issues about barriers to entry in the marketplace than Milton Friedman.
Real quick, so what was the difference between like Hayek and Friedman with monetary policy? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. You don't have to even like get super scholarly, but in a nutshell.
It's about central banking. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Austrians believe that the Austrians can be basically described as this: they believe in the boom and bust cycle, the business cycle, which is created by artificially lowering rates. So when you manipulate the rates in the market, and
you've created malinvestment that has to go somewhere.
Exactly, it's got to go somewhere. Right. The free market actually can totally operate in the market or in the rate market. It's natural because rates really are a reflection of savings.
Yeah. And
so any manipulation in that or in the expansion of money and credit creates some kind of adverse effect, right? Well, I think the Chicago School believes that there is a need for central banking. In fact, I think even Milton Friedman was against the gold standard, whereas in the Austrian school would either believe in a gold standard or in a free market solution to money.
Right.
But inevitably, I think most Austrian scholars would say it's going to be gold because history shows that gold is the best. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, almost all Austrians would base all currency on someone somewhere is going to create a currency. It's probably going to be a private bank, or it could be anybody. It could be
it's market driven.
That's what I mean.
Yep.
So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is gold is like you said, is just a reflection of time or a history of what is the most popular thing to back up funny money, fiat currency, or any issued IOU. I mean, all dollars being an IOU for gold in the past.
Right.
So you're telling me though, like the Chicago School, the Friedman, they thought, as far as central banks go, that they needed or
that it's necessary for a bank to provide credit. I think Milton Friedman's argument here.
But not a state bank, or
well, maybe there's there's difference in if it's I think they would all say a federal bank, because when you talk about central bank, you're usually referring to the United States.
I meant the state, any state in any country.
The state as in government. Yes,
I always refer to the state as old school, like the state.
Like during the Great Depression, what was the cause of the Great Depression? A Chicago scholar would probably argue that the Fed did not provide credit quickly enough to stave off the Depression, whereas the Austrian would say it was the credit creation of the 20s that led to the Great Depression.
Right.
A bubble formed in the stock market. Now,
right.
Now who to believe? I mean, Milton Friedman was very wise in many things. I would believe the Austrians because the Austrians, going back to Mises, had predicted every big recession or every big economic crisis since the Great Depression. Why? Because they follow what the Fed is doing or what a central bank is doing.
And now we got public announcement once again of the factors that are going to create another housing bubble. Yeah, where the Fed is actually saying that they want to stimulate housing again.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a bubble in the housing market. I would say that prices have leveled off at an inflated price level. Okay, now the reason being is I don't believe we're going to make the same mistakes that we did going crazy in the housing market.
But hold on real quick.
Oh, sure.
You can elaborate on that, or I want you to, but isn't holding the Fed funds rate so ridiculously low going to, just with any population, aren't you always going to have a major part of the malinvestment go to housing anyways when you hold the interest rate that low?
Sure, it's going to, but the real malinvestment right now is in the bond market, okay?
Okay.
That's where actually all this excess credit is gone. In fact, I'm not just talking about the credit that's created during the 90s, which led to the housing bubble in the early 2000s, but also the credit that's been created post-2008. It's going in the bond market, and more specifically, the treasury market, which is where the big bond bubble is. However, with what you were talking about is the housing market bubble. It's actually inflated prices. If you look at the span of 96 to 2006, in 2006, the height of the market, housing market, and I usually quote the Schilling 20, which is a pretty well-known index for the top 20 cities. The housing market in that span grew about 174%.
Yeah.
The big correction, the big crash, as they say, was 23%.
Interesting.
And right now, you're starting to see housing prices level off, or even slightly appreciate.
So you're saying it was a tremor?
It was nothing.
Right.
I mean, to think that houses which have grown at 1 or 2% a year, probably historically, if even that.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah. It's okay. Oh yeah. Houses have not historically been known as investments. It's more of a last 20 years thought that you put your money away.
Because people have tunnel vision based on watching values. They see values go, and they think like that's just how housing and money works together.
Right.
When really it was just a function of human beings playing with the money supply and
credit.
They were
playing with the money supply, and that extra credit had to go somewhere. And it was with government regulations, and there's no doubt it was going to the housing market. I mean, everyone should be in a home. I think that was one of Bush's sayings was, we got to get everyone in a home.
Yeah,
home ownership is an American dream.
I sampled that at the first track of my last album, and he says that it's called the American Dream Down Payment Fund.
Yeah.
And I tried to quantify how important that was because it's a great bullet in my arsenal against people that want to talk about the Fed and why you need the Fed and all that crap. But so I tried to quantify it, and my point is it wasn't that important of a measure of an implementation to seeing what happened. But what was important was it was like a microcosm, or it was a symbol. It was a symbol of what was going on, because you have George W. Bush up there, elected Republican, and he says the greatest barrier to first-time ownership is a large down payment. Yeah. And then he says, so it only makes sense to help people make that down payment. Exactly. And he goes, this will use taxpayer money, and then he just keeps going, and I go, hold on, dude, this guy just said it only makes sense to use taxpayer money to give people their down payments. It's like, well, what's going on, you know? And then back to like my job or whatever, I meet so many people that have no idea about that because they see it as a two-party thing, and they think like, okay, we get this good thing and the other side gets that bad thing. We get this good thing, the other, I get two, you get one, I get two, you get one. And so like the other side, the Democrats, or what they would just refer to as liberals, they would think like if any measure created malinvestment, it was totally like the liberal Democrats doing it. When really it was... it's such a long-term, major problem with humans manipulating the interest rate, if you ask me.
You're making a good point. What comes to mind here is one of the greatest injustices to American economic education is that George W. Bush and Herbert Hoover were capitalist. Because there's a lot of comparisons in my mind between what happened in the Great Depression under Hoover and what happened today with George W. Bush. In fact, when you look at exit polling, the media was right about economics being the number one motivational factor for voters in the 2012 November elections. The problem that we didn't see and why we thought Romney was going to win and Republicans would win overwhelmingly is because they still blame George W. Bush, and somewhat rightfully so, even though Obama was there in the Senate voting the same exact poor way, and once he got in office as president, he doubled down on everything.
True.
I mean, the fiscal year 2009 budget deficit, which is our largest one on to record, I would say the biggest cost driver was actually Obama's stimulus plan. But also TARP was under Bush the last part of 2000.
Right, there you go,
yeah.
the TARP.
So you got two guys, and it's similar to Hoover and FDR, is you got two guys that believe nothing but Keynesian economics.
Right.
That the government needs to, that the capital or the markets are flawed, and that the government is a necessity to stimulate economic growth. And it's just that thinking that screws us down the road. In fact, I think George W. Bush even said, and in fact, I found out on the campaign season that Paul Ryan had a similar comment. I'm saying this verbatim, or not verbatim, but that we need to abandon our principles in order to save our principles.
That's all politics.
Yeah, meaning I believe in capitalism, but we have to forget about capitalism right now in order to save capitalism. What the heck does that mean?
That was almost everybody in my family when Bush was in and TARP was coming around, and they were like, well, we got to give this some thought. We got to rescue these institutions because we believe in capitalism, and we want these construction companies to be able to get credit so they can work and keep the jobs going. Well, that's capitalism, right? And it's like, no, you got to, I always say, like, zoom out. Like, that's, not that I'm correct by just yelling a catchphrase, but that's going on in my brain in every conversation is when people can't zoom out far enough, and I'm trying to, like, bring the conversation to a more quote-unquote zoomed out position. Like, oh, you want credit to lose, well, where's that credit coming from? Yeah. Oh, it's coming from this larger institution. Well, weren't they in trouble? Yeah, well, why are they fine now? Well, they got bailed. What's that mean when they got bailed out? Well, where'd that money come from? Oh, exactly. We printed that money. Well, what does that mean when you printed the money? What happened to the dollar in your pocket? You know, I mean, it's like if you can't understand the problem in anything in life, just zoom out.
That's right.
That's the way I see it.
And most people can't zoom out because, and this is a real sad thing about the future of America, is these school systems are teaching Keynesian economics. And honest to God, I feel like, and this is reaffirmed by many clients of mine and many people I talk to in the political world, that I know what I'm talking about in economics. You know what? I never even heard of the Austrian School of Economics.
Until after high school, right?
Yeah, no, after college. Oh. And I pretty much had a minor in economics. I was a business major, politics major. Many macro classes, and I never once heard about Mises or Hayek in any of my economic classes. I heard about Friedman. I heard about the supply side thought, but I never heard about the Austrian school. And I would say I credit most of my education in economics other than just perceiving what markets are like, because, you know, as an investment advisor, I'm following stock market.
Everybody builds their own interpretation. You know what I mean? It's like you play any sport, your technique is going to be a little bit different. And sure, a coach can be like, okay, you need to dribble this basketball, then you need to practice your free throws. But then there are kids that grow up in the inner city and they got nothing, and they don't even have a basketball, but they show up on the court and they get 5 minutes of playing time, and after like years and years and years, and they try hard and hard, they have their own style, their own perception. And for me, just to parallel kind of what you're saying, I didn't hear any of this stuff until I was in college. Then after college, I had a little bit of knowledge. Then I'm in my own type of business now where I work for a company and I'm on the sales side. And then I see my own, like just trying to parallel what you're saying here, I see it from my own angle now. And it's like a double reinforcement because I already read enough on the differences of, let's say, Austrian and Keynesian and stuff like that. And then you see how it implements itself in the real market. And then you see the education system that you had, and it freaks you the hell out because you go, wow, man, I was fed like this very narrow.
But even if you're just fed that, as long as they brought up the other side, it would have been fine. But I remember in college, I actually had a professor right on the board, the effects of Reaganomics.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to UW River Falls.
Okay.
I got commissioned, so I went to ROTC at the University of Minnesota.
Sure.
So I went back and forth for 2 years, the last 2 years of my college career. So this economic professor writes on the board, he writes, the effects of Reaganomics, as if Reaganomics are some kind of economic school, right? Because that's really the opposite of Keynesianism was we learned about Reaganomics, supply side, right? So he writes the effects of Reaganomics. I kid you not. He writes 4 bullet points, and the first one is the 1980 recession. I raised my hand in the class as soon as he gets done writing all 4 bullet points. I said, "Excuse me, Professor. Ronald Reagan wasn't elected till 1980. He took office in 81. How could the 80 recession be a result of Reaganomics?" And the professor had a really broken English because he's from Uganda, which is an English-speaking colony but it it's the dialect or something that was hard for me to understand. So
Sure.
that probably prolonged it, but it literally went back and forth for a couple minutes between us. And I finally got him to race off the board. Because any idiot knows that you can't affect the 80 recession if you don't even get into office in 81.
Right.
In fact, you couldn't even really affect the 81 recession because, it takes a while for your policies to be implemented.
Right,
it was
right.
the dumbest thing ever. And guess what?
And he was an economics professor?
He's an economics professor, just ingrained in Keynesianism. And the economics department was just a joke at River Falls, and it probably is in most schools, other than maybe George Washington University or George Mason. I think it's George Mason that's got a lot of some good Austrian scholars.
I think you're right. I think it's George Mason.
My original point was you could do so much more justice for your economic understanding as just spending some money on some lectures at the Ludwig von Mises Institute.
Yes.
Or just going to their store and buying books like, here's Murray Rothbard's The Case Against the Fed. Or, in fact, I even got a book here that I read, to recommend to clients that are homeschooling children or that want to start from like a 8th grade reading level, because most people understand economics in 8th grade level. It's called Lessons for Young Economists, written by Robert Murphy. Very good book. It's a textbook. In fact, I think they even have like a teacher's book, so it's got some of the quizzes and stuff, answers. This is a great book to understanding the Austrian business cycle and classical liberalism and how it relates to the economy.
Do you know anything about like praxeology? You know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's interesting because when you really look at all economics, I think the smarter just the human species gets, the more it has to be more Austrian, to use just kind of a cliche term or whatever, not in the sense of what all Austrian economists have believed and believe, but like praxeology is just a study, because of course economics is the study of human action and exchange.
That's right.
But I guess what I'm trying to say from a non-scholar here is the further down the road and the more well-rounded, the more breadth of knowledge that the internet brings the average human being, the more economics is becoming more praxeology. The more economics is becoming not just human exchanges measured in quantifiable terms, it's becoming human exchanges and human interaction, period. Mm-hmm. It's becoming like a bigger thing. That's the way I see it. So economics is becoming more fun almost.
Sounds like someone's read Mises.
I've read them all, but I don't know if I've ever read a complete book from I haven't even read The Road to Serfdom.
Especially Mises.
They're tough.
Well, I mean, look, I got the Theory of Money and Credit here.
Yeah, that one I love reading.
I think that's bigger than my Bible here. I mean, this is and how many people are going to want to read a book on money and credit? I mean,
right.
I have to be in a special class of nerdism to even engage in a book this big. But guess what? This is a very important book, and it talks about money, which most people don't understand. In fact,
I thought I knew what money was for years because you just use it every day, and then when you really get into let's say praxeology, and you look at just like what money is, and it's the most interesting, mind-boggling human creation ever. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I will not get into religion.
I would actually say it's the simplest thing ever.
But
what they do to it makes it so complex.
That's what I mean.
Because they're cheating.
They're taking something natural and they're making it unnatural.
Every prisoner, understands what money is, because prisoners don't have wonderful U.S. Federal Reserve notes, or dollars as we call them.
Right.
They use something in exchange for gambling debts or for whatever else. And, there's good case studies, in POW camps, and I would imagine this happens in U.S. prisons, where cigarettes are money.
Absolutely.
It's valued by everyone there. I mean, money is actually very simple for us to understand, Beaver pelts have been money in history. Spices have been money. Gold's money. It's something that, could be used in a medium of exchange and has value to everyone that, is included in the exchange.
Let me try to define. I was going to actually try to put you on the spot, and then I said, let me try to define difference between money and currency.
Yeah.
And then see where you go from this. But from my understanding of everything, the easiest way to understand it is money is human beings using, whether it's numbers or not, but it's a human concocted value. It's a dynamic, quantifiable in each individual's mind. It's different in everyone's mind, but it's the human created value of something in an exchange, right? Yeah. And so something, and then of course the factor T for time, something now is worth more than later,
sure,
which is the interest rate, T being the interest rate. So for me, money is the value established that humans agree upon that something or a group of things are worth, whereas currency is the physical manifestation in the real world. So money is up here, it's imaginary. Money is something that we come up with in our minds, from our souls. Whereas currency is how we choose as people to implement it in a physical manifestation of this idea of money. That's how I define the two. Because a lot of people use money as that idea, and then they instantly go, well, pelts were money. And then you go, it's true pelts were money, but in a way pelts were currency too. Whereas you can use money as an example where it's not currency, but you can use money as an example where it is currency. But you can't use currency as an example of your brain. There's no currency in your brain. Currency is purely the physical manifestation of it. Sure. So correct me or elaborate.
No, I think you're right on the money here. Pun intended, right?
Yeah.
Real basic, money is a medium of exchange. Okay, so let's get down to an economic lesson that everyone understands. If you're selling beer and I'm selling paper, and you need my paper and I need your beer, we can trade X amount of beer for X amount of paper. That's a direct exchange. What we find out in economies is you might sell beer and I sell pens, and you don't need pens. You have no use for a pen. And so I want your beer, but you don't need my pens. How do we ever exchange? How do I ever get your beer? We need some medium of exchange.
Right.
So what ends up happening is marketplaces, as you were actually talking about, much people have a value of something, and I'm just going to use the example here of gold, because thousands of years of human history show that gold has some kind of value to people. It's used for exchange, so I don't have to directly barter with you to trade one good or service for another, and that allows us to do commerce. So I can gladly take, or you'll gladly take some gold for the beer that you're selling, and you don't have to come back and use that gold to buy my paper. Or pens. You can take that gold to go buy barley so you can make more beer. So that's the good thing. That's what money really is. It's a medium of exchange. What we've seen throughout history is governments and central banks have they've ripped us off. Okay, the earliest human form of inflation or counterfeiting is when governments would clip coins.
Oh, I talk about this all the time.
And this is a very interesting point, because
it's my favorite thing to talk about in economics. Yeah. Clipping coins.
Clipping coins. It would be so obvious to us that we're being ripped off by today the Federal Reserve or government.
Illiterates could figure out economics better than today's college graduates could. A dude who couldn't even read.
You need a PhD to understand why we're getting ripped off by the Fed. But let's just use some examples here. Old economies like the Romans would clip coins. They would have, let's say, a coin made of gold, and they would know, everyone in the economy would understand that this amount of gold, let's just use an easy weight of 1 ounce, would be worth X amount of this good and service. So what they would do is, to inflate the money, is they'd clip a little bit of that coin, and then they would melt down that metal and produce more coins.
Right.
So they were essentially deteriorating some of the value of that coin by its weight in gold. Well, that was an easy form of inflation, because anyone could look at a coin and see what's clipped, right? So there's less gold content there. Therefore, in my mind, it's actually worth less value, and therefore that makes its way through the economy.
Right, like you took something I had.
Exactly.
Well, just a little, but over time you keep taking a little I have. Now I have less of that.
Yep, exactly.
And now I know you have more of that.
So what happens? Prices go up
right.
because these coins have less value. Well, when you use fiat money, which is what we have, it's so much harder.
Yeah, it is.
Because essentially what we have now is money that's not even backed by gold. But even when it was backed by gold, and there's many points in U.S. history that money was backed by gold and we still cheated. A good example is during the Civil War, is the greenback was temporarily taken off the gold standard in order to inflate the currency. Or back in the 30s, when FDR unilaterally issued a federal executive order in order to confiscate gold so they could peg the dollar, I think an $8 difference to an ounce of gold. They do this, but right now we don't even have our money backed by gold. So it's very simple for them to just print more money. In fact, they don't even print money anymore. What they do is they inject credit.
Yeah.
There's no real printing presses going on. What the Federal Reserve does is they essentially look at the checking account that the Treasury has at the Federal Reserve Bank, and they add a zero on their, their checking account. And that's creating money. Now, eventually down the line, if people are redeeming actual physical dollars to use in exchange, then yeah, there would be some money printing. But essentially, it stays in the digital world. But what ends up happening in the big markets like the oil market and the gold and silver market, I mean, that's why prices go up over time, because there's more credit out there and prices end up going up and there's upward pressure on it because there's inflation. And it's an ingenious thing. Every time the government doesn't balance a budget and the Federal Reserve comes in and buys up that debt, which is called quantitative easing, they basically monetize their debt. They're creating new money, or adding that zero on the balance sheet. It's ripping us off. It's an indirect tax because we never pay it directly. We don't see our tax rates go up in April. But what we do see is the dollar that buys less groceries, as we've all seen, buys less gasoline in our when we fill up at the gas station, and other prices. So yeah, I mean, it's almost ingenious. You almost have to have a PhD to go talk to Ben Bernanke to find out how much of a scheme he's running. And this is the reason why people don't have pitchforks out in front of the Federal Reserve building, because they don't understand it. And it's just a simple, the simple explanation is people just don't understand what money is. Even though they do, in their hearts, they do understand money. Anyone would. They just get so used to using a dollar bill that they don't even ask, why does this dollar bill have something called a Federal Reserve note? In fact, what is a note? A note is a promise to pay you back. Promise to pay you back in something. But if you take a Federal Reserve note into a Federal Reserve Bank and you say, I would like my gold specie, right? They're going to look at you and they're going to say, yeah, this money is backed by the same thing. There's no gold here, even though the Federal Reserve owns $11 billion in gold reserves. At least that's what they put on their balance sheet.
I just heard about Australia. The entire, you should look into this and fact check me maybe, but I heard like 99% or something of all Australia's gold is stored in the city of London. Because their claim is that that's where the market for it is. That's where the most trading is.
Yeah, but London is the biggest exchange.
Right, but if you're in London is one of the 3 places in the world that's an autonomous region still, correct?
Yeah.
London, Vatican, and D.C.
Yeah,
that's what I heard. That those 3, and we call it a conspiracy theory. I don't know if it's true, but they say that basically all measures put towards looking at what the city of London is, Washington D.C., and the Vatican is there 3 absolutely autonomous regions that operate with no checks and balances are those 3. That's what I heard.
Well, I mean, I certainly would say Washington D.C. is that way.
Well, yeah, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. Well, here
and maybe the Vatican too.
I asked Schiff this because we were just talking about Bernanke, and I was going to ask you.
Peter Schiff.
Yeah,
okay.
When we went, because you were there, I guess, when he was in town for the real crash.
Yep, sure.
And I waited for the line to go way
down.
A
very brilliant man, by the way. And
I like Schiff.
And technically, he's a competitor of mine.
Oh, all right.
Or I should say I'm competition to him. He owns a brokerage firm. I'm just an investment advisor, so we're structured a little differently. But we both manage money professionally. But, you know, he is a very, very wise guy. And if more Americans listen to him, we'd probably be a little bit better off here in society. But go on.
I was just going to say your opinion on Bernanke, because I went up to Schiff and I just kind of put the mic in his face and was trying to be semi-non-threatening. Because he's like, he gets nervous because when Sean Wright did the We Are Change thing, and he was just like, who are you? And he's, oh, we're with We Are Change. And it took a little coaxing to get Schiff to do that interview. But for me, I only got, 45 seconds with him.
Sure.
And I just basically said, hey, man, Ben Bernanke, do you think that Bernanke believes himself? That's what I was really interested in. And Schiff gave me an answer that I was really happy, but at the same time disappointed. Because he did throw both answers out there. And he said, surely he's a liar. You can tell by his demeanor, his nervousness, that he does, he's spitting stuff out basically just as a talking head. But fundamentally, yeah, he believes in what he's doing. He believes that too. So Shiv gave me both answers. But for me, I'm just like a personal skeptic that a person that has the education like Bernanke, and he knows the history of the Fed, and he knows the previous heads of the Federal Reserve, that I wonder if he psychologically gets home and every single thing that he's ever studied Keynesian-wise, he believes that is his professional life, his professional mind, and his professional self. And so for me, the further this crap goes on, the fiscal cliff and quantitative easing 94 and everything, I'm just like, I don't know, man. I wonder if Schiff's like just covering his ass, because how can you look at Bernanke anymore and think that he believes that just expanding credit, especially to these major institutions that have all these, I call it baby bird syndrome. That's what I always call it. Because it's like these baby birds are down there just chirping and chirping and chirping. And you got, people above, and then whenever they want to just puke in everyone else's mouth, whatever's left, that's essentially what's going on with credit in this country now, in the monetary system. So,
asking that question to Peter is like asking that question to me, because Peter and I probably would look at the actions of Ben Bernanke in the Federal Reserve more than most people even in the financial services industry, because we believe the root of the problem starts with the Fed. And I have to ask this question too to myself, because it's a tough one. I don't have the answer, and I'm probably just like Peter on this. Watch the CBS, I think it's a 60 Minutes interview with Bernanke a couple years ago, and you'll find he is like, it's very obvious he's like quivering.
Yes,
shaking.
I saw that, man,
and it's just
and
so
he does
bizarre.
that all the time.
Yeah,
but that
so
interview
bizarre.
was the pinnacle of his weird quivering. Like,
I know, and it's almost like when you see that, the nonverbal to me says, "Man, this guy is nervous about something."
Yes,
and he's. I mean, it's not like he's never done interviews.
My mom asked me if I stole the cookie from the cookie jar, and I looked like Ben Bernanke.
Shaking.
Oh, I would have been grounded
and it was
before
noticeable.
she could prove it.
And I got high def TV, so I could see it, but I was like, "That's really bizarre." Look at his. I think he was a Time Magazine's Person of the Year. I think that's the article that I was reading, and it got on a little bit more personal level with him. And they asked him, does he own his home outright? I'm paraphrasing here, and he said he's got a 30-year arm.
Yes.
Now, not everyone in the financial service industry thinks the same way I do, but an arm is a joke. Unless you are completely corrupt and you control interest rates, and maybe an arm makes sense because you're going to keep rates low, but or keep them going lower, and it's more affordable. But an arm's kind of a joke, because really mortgage rates eventually are market driven. Sure. I mean, right now we're living under a fictitious, artificially low rate environment.
Yes.
But eventually, at some point, rates are going to go back up because the markets are going to say, "Hey, there's too much risk here. We need a higher reward." It's surprising it's lasted this long.
If there's some capitalism left over.
There is. I mean, you can never overcome markets.
Right.
Anytime government's bearing a black market.
I was just going to say that, then you call it the black market.
Exactly.
But yes, fundamentally,
a market's always going to exist.
Right. It's just a word to describe the human interaction that exists. Right. Even if there's coercion, it's whatever's left over.
That's right.
Right.
So I was like, a 30-year arm. Hey, you're the president of the Federal Reserve, or the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and you can't buy your own home? You don't have the cash reserve to buy your own home? I mean, you don't have to be a Dave Ramsey clone to believe in less debt. I mean, why are you even financing a home? It got me thinking about that. Ben Bernanke is a presidential appointee, which means he's going to most likely be a scholar. He is making $80,000 a year or something like that. Ben Bernanke is nothing but a puppet. That's my conclusion here, and I'm not a conspiracy.
So you're more on the same page to me than at least Schiff led on that he is. Now he may think more on this terms than you and I even know.
Yeah.
He may be just watching himself too. Who knows? But
who knows?
The way you describe it, I mean, that's kind of exactly
he's a puppet.
Right. That's what
he is not the one pulling the strings. The reason the FOMC, the Federal Open Markets Committee, which makes these decisions on monetary policy, and they meet several times a year, and we only get to hear about the FOMC decisions, I think it's 6 weeks after the fact, and then it's just highlighted notes. It's not even the full meeting.
Right.
The reason they hide this is because these people are screwing us over. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? I'm not one of those 9/11 truthers, and I don't believe in all this stuff. What I will tell you is the Federal Reserve is ripping us off, and the reason they're able to do it is because of ignorance in the American populace. We don't understand. We don't understand what money is, or at least what the Federal Reserve note, the dollar bill that we're using, and they're getting away with this. And the way inflation works is the first people to receive the newly created money
have an advantage every time.
Exactly, they're the first people to you get to spend the newly created money, and they don't get hit with the higher prices
before prices adjust. So
exactly,
they're always edging you out on a fraction. It's like when you bet online, and the house takes like a 1-2% every bet, no matter what. That's what it is. Even if you're stupid with your money, but you're getting the money way higher up in the pyramid than everyone else, you still have a couple percent advantage every time, no matter what you do.
Who's getting the money first, and who belongs in the FOMC?
Yeah.
The biggest banks, the guys that were bailed out. They are the members of the FOMC. They do this under no audit. And when we talk about like the audit, the Fed bill, we're talking about
audit.
we're not talking about a physical audit, although we kind of can be talking about that too, and making sure ensuring that what's on their balance sheet is legitimate. But we're talking about an audit of these meetings because they're doing these meetings in secrecy. We're not able to listen into the conversation that's occurring that's setting interest rates, the Fed funds rate, as you alluded to before, and bond buying programs, mortgage-backed security program. Now, why do they say these need to be in secret? Because we want to leave politics out of it, is what they always say. And because the decisions that they make can affect the markets, adversely affect the markets. And so we need that level of secrecy. Folks, they are secret because they're screwing you over.
Yeah.
They are the first ones to touch this money. And this is not a conspiracy. This is what's happening.
Yes. Well, it is a conspiracy.
If you don't,
I'm the conspiracy guy. You're not. So I'm telling you that is a conspiracy. Because conspiracy is when they're conspiring.
They are conspiring.
And what's the number one thing to make something a conspiracy or not a conspiracy? Yeah. Is the door open or closed? So anytime we're talking about what they're doing behind the closed door, that is a conspiracy. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, by definition. I hate saying that because
I know it's another bastardized word.
Yeah, people think conspiracy and they think you're crazy, you're a nut.
Right.
But I'm telling you, folks,
is a conspiracy.
If you don't believe me, you go find a bank rate right now that keeps up with the CPI, which is what the government tells you is the rate of inflation.
Right.
If you invest right now in a bank account, you are guaranteed to lose money.
Correct.
Okay, now people say, I fear the bank, so I'm going to put money in my mattress. Okay, well, you're going to lose 2% of your money by doing that. You don't actually lose physical money, but your money buys 2% less than it does than if you were to spend it now. The next worst thing to do is go put it in a 1-year CD because you're going to earn less. You're going to, I don't have my rate sheet in front of me, but you're earning, I think it's like 70 basis points, if even that.
You want to do a plug real quick for your business?
Sure.
Do it. Tell them what you can do for them. Whatever you want to say.
I can't. See, that's the big.
See, I buy physical silver.
Yeah, but you can't just buy one asset. See what I do?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm saying and other stuff.
Yeah.
But for metals, but I don't hold gold, but I hold a lot of silver.
I don't know what your financial objective is, Mage. I deal with a lot of people with different goals. Okay.
Sure.
The easiest thing for me to do is manage people's money long term because I can detail what the next economic crisis is and then to protect their wealth during that crisis. So that means diversifying and getting out of the bad bets like the treasury market.
Sure.
What I can't do, what's very difficult for me, is the guy that's got a house that he wants to buy in a year and he's sitting on $100,000 in cash. What do I say to this guy? He should be able to take his $100,000, because most people don't save right now. The average household debt is $9,000 in credit card debt.
Oh,
so he
God.
should take his savings
Ugh.
and be able to get a good rate of return. He's going to lose because he's going to get, let's say, 0.7% on his money, and the rise in prices, as quoted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we'll just go with that. We'll make it simple, even though they're lying on that figure, is 2%. It's actually 1.9. Let's just say 2%. He's losing over 1% by keeping his money in the bank. If he goes into a bond or a treasury bill, he's still losing that 1%. In fact, if you're investing in a 10-year treasury right now, you're still getting a negative rate of return. You're losing money. You're losing your principal because prices are going up higher than the rate of return on your investment. It's robbery. So, you could chalk this up to just some crazy nuts, Mage and me talking, or you could look at what your bank account's giving you as rates, and you could say, yeah, this is crazy. Gasoline's going up, 20% year over year, and my health care is going up 8% annualized, and my child's education's going up 6% every year, and I'm earning a whopping 0.7% on my CD rate. So
yeah, I know what you mean about. Everybody's got different objectives, and for me, like I got a FHA in my house, so it's kind of funny because I'm the ultimate hypocrite because I'm like, well, I wouldn't be owning my house if it wasn't for the government subsidizing that stuff with FHA loan. It's tiny percent down and all that stuff. So I don't know.
Well, in that hard, unless you live off the grid, how could you ever be 100%?
Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
Thinking through.
Right.
You just, I don't know where you draw the line. If you're not producing anything for the economy and you go into the government and saying, give me a welfare check, you're not a productive member of society. And some people call me harsh and a bad person for that, but I'm sorry. That's the redistribution of wealth, and that's a socialist viewpoint, and I don't believe in that. I don't buy in Marxism.
Absolutely.
You need to produce something. Working at McDonald's drive-thru is far better than going to the government, even if government's going to give you a check 2 or 3 times what McDonald's is going to do. Be a productive member of society. But we all fall prey to the markets or to the intervention in the marketplace, and if your need is to buy a home, there's a chance that, well, actually, I'm not going to say a chance. Regardless of you wanting it this way, you're going to end up having your home owned by Fannie or Freddie, because I think 90% of new mortgage rates or mortgages that are written are bought up by Fannie and Freddie, and the Federal Reserve backs that by $40 billion a month, and they're quantitative easing 3. So it's just there's so much distortion in the market. The honest thing to do in life is be a ethical, moral person to your fellow man, and not just ask for a handout. But things like that, I don't find you to be a hypocrite or going against your beliefs. It's just what it is right now.
Yeah. No, I say that in a philosophical way. Not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a hypocrite in the sense that I'm participating in something where I had the choice to not participate in that. Like, okay, I want to drive to work, so I have to participate in a... No, here you go. We'll get on this too. Guns. The conceal and carry permit. The ultimate Second Amendment nuts out there. And I say that with love, not with hate. They think the conceal and carry permit is something that if you believe in America, you should never participate in.
It's anti-freedom, and I guess
carry your gun, even if it breaks quote unquote bunny ears unconstitutional laws. You should carry your gun and not participate in the conceal and carry permit, because then you're already subjecting yourself to a restriction of the Second Amendment, which comes only after freedom to speak.
Concealed carry laws are the antithesis of freedom.
I agree.
And it's one of the beefs I have with the NRA, who heavily pushes, carry laws. It moves us in a direction towards freedom, but it's a cop-out. And here's why. You have a right... Okay, we need to get down to the basis of, why we're here on the planet. The most philosophical argument you could possibly make about government and why you're here on this planet is that you're given life by a creator. I happen to be a Christian. Mm-hmm. I believe that's God. Even if you're not a Christian and you believe you're solely a product of nature, of some spontaneous design.
It's the same.
You're given rights from your creator.
From
if that's
I always
nature or
call it
God.
from being human.
Yes.
That's that's the
There
phrase
you
I
go.
use.
So you have natural rights, right? We can all
Right.
agree we have natural rights. Governments are supposed to be instituted to protect those rights. God, where did I read that? Oh yeah, the Declaration of Independence, our founding of this country, right? We're so far from that right now. The Constitution does not provide us rights as people. It provides rights to government.
Correct.
It protects our rights, our
Correct.
God-given rights. Your God-given right is to protect your life. That is the most fundamental right you have. Freedom of speech, screw that. If you don't have a right to protect your life and your family's life, you have no right. You're basically living in an oppressive state.
Correct.
The best way to protect your life is using a tool known as a handgun. Or we could even say
True.
assault weapon or whatever we want to. A gun is an effective tool to protect your life.
Have you read this article called, God, why am I drawing a blank now? I think it was almost 100 years old now. But I think it was called The Great Equalizer or something. But it talks about basically the Colt 45 or whatever. But it says nothing...
God made every man equal, or God made every man and Colt made every man equal.
Because what I am referring to is this article or something that was written. I know I read it. I didn't see it or hear it. I read it. And it was from almost 100 years or something. But it talked about how... anything feminist, and that's a bastardized word because it can mean old school good stuff, but nowadays it means a lot of like state intervention crap, and we won't even get on that right now. But let's use it as old school feminist or just women's ability to be bunny ears equal. The pistol was by far the most effective tool for women to be able to be equal to a man. Because any woman in any scenario, whether it's a big city or a small town, that would be physically bossed around. Maybe she didn't marry. Maybe she, back in the day when if you didn't marry by frickin' 20, you were weird or something.
Right.
A woman who could actually defend her person from a physical assault, all of a sudden, society raised the entire gender with the invention of the pistol. And I read this article, and I already, was pro-Second Amendment in all forms, but it blew my freaking mind to read this and go, I never realized that because, I'm not a woman, and when you think about, like, you got a young boy as a kid or something, and you go, go play in the park, we got a young girl, and you go, okay, who you going with? Okay, come back before dark, or whatever. It's a completely different thing, even today. Right. But back in the day, women, couldn't vote, all kinds of stuff. It was a different class of people.
It's a great point.
And the pistol was the thing that quantifiably, and there's no way you could quantify it, but from just using what we would like to call logic, quantifiably, the pistol was the thing that advanced women in society in comparison to men. Yeah, and it blew my mind to read it.
It's a very interesting point. And today, that still applies to women. I usually feel, most attackers, you and I are fairly good sized dudes. People would be, a guy would be in for a fight if he was to come at us.
Right.
But a woman, my wife, I'll use as an example, is, very thin. Mm-hmm. She doesn't weigh a lot. Mm-hmm. What would she do if a guy our size was coming at her? And this is the equalizer. Where I was going with my original point, though, was that we have a constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms. Okay? It's not that we're given a right by government.
Exactly.
We're protected. Why do we have that protection? The most fundamental reason we have it, and this is ingrained in the Declaration of Independence, is when governments become destructive of the protection of liberty, it's our right to abolish that government. Mm-hmm. And how would you ever abolish a government if you have no match in munitions and power, in physical power, which is what weapons provide? If we have an oppressive government that has all the guns, we are an armless or a disarmed society. There's no physical check on the power of an oppressive government. And if you don't think that can happen in America, then you're just ignorant of history, and quite frankly, you're doomed to repeat it.
Right, you probably saw that new movie Lincoln. I haven't seen it, but not you. But I was saying those type of people. That was what the movie, from what I understand, was made for. That was that type of person, the person that looks at the $5 bill and goes, "Oh my God, wow, this guy he busted through the ranks. You know, have you read The Real Lincoln by Thomas DeLorenzo?
No,
he's a Mises Institute.
Yeah,
guy.
I've heard Lorenzo's.
Oh my God!
Argument.
Just talks about all like Lincoln being, you know, trying runaway slaves and stuff. I mean, he was making money off of trying runaway slaves, and then you look at nullification, which is declared a racist action when the states nullify federal laws.
Right.
And Tom Woods is the best guy to listen to because he goes, "Well, let's go look at the original nullification. Wisconsin, they had nullification because all the runaway slaves were going to Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin state government said, as long as you make it here, we're not abiding by any federal laws. We are, quote, nullifying them, so we're not going to send you back. If a slave made it to Wisconsin, the Wisconsin state government was not going to subject to the federal government.
That's right. And you're bringing up great points here. I'm obviously a huge fan of Tom Woods, great historian and great constitutional expert. DeLorenzo talks a lot about Lincoln in something you never will be educated on, and he makes great points on how Lincoln was actually really a tyrant.
Yes.
But my point is that there's two real reasons. The core reason is protection of yourself and your family. But that can mean either from an oppressive government or from a perpetrator. And we want to, the NRA and a lot of gun owners want to talk about the perpetrator. But we have to remember that we are a check and balance on an oppressive state taking away our liberties. And if we didn't have guns, we have no checks and balances. And I guarantee there have been foreign armies that have thought about invading the United States in our history and have, refrained from it because they say, oh my God, this population is well armed.
Exactly.
I mean, I imagine coming across the Canadian border in the northern woods of Minnesota or Wisconsin. I mean, imagine how many people have guns there and how many guys know how to shoot a rifle over 100 yards, right?
Exactly.
So, no, I mean, this is a fundamental right that's protected by the Second Amendment, and if we were to take away that right, it has to be done the right way constitutionally. It's not being done that way, and what we're doing is we're allowing states to intervene and, and superimpose their will on the people with, infringement on their rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment by saying you got to go take a class and you got to go, ask the sheriff for permission to do it, and you got to use money to do it, and then there's a manner in which you can, protect yourself and carry, and I mean, this is just antithesis to liberty. And in fact, what it ends up doing is it leaves more people disarmed. If you just had what I call a constitutional carry, and you just say, you know what, the Second Amendment protects your right to bear arms, right? Keep and bear arms. Doesn't matter how you do it. Then more people are armed, and you don't have to go through a class and go through a sheriff and whatnot. Now, a smart gun owner is going to learn the weapon that they're using, and there's, it's just natural. I mean, there are going to be bad gun owners and good gun owners, but the good gun owners are going to do it. But they can do that on their own. They don't need to have a state-regulated class or state-sponsored class or licensed instructor, and they don't have to go through a sheriff. And, it's just a barrier to people, executing their most fundamental right of protection. And it's sad. It's really sad that we do it. And I would love to see those laws changed. But
me too. It's sort of like if you were forced or, you're compelled to learn something in school by a state educator, or you have the desire to go learn something, whether it's basketball or whether it's American history, and you pay a guy to teach you.
Right.
I mean, how are you going to learn faster? Which one? Yeah. When you got to show up every day at the same time, and a guy who's working for the state who gets his check no matter what's got to teach you this because the government told him? Yeah. Or if you go, man, I really want to learn Spanish, like so bad, and you go and you just pay a guy for an hour every day, and you show up on your own time, he's on his own time, you pay him whatever you think's fair. I mean, it's just human nature, I guess, to what I'm trying to say in the context of guns is the constitutional carry, what you're referring to.
Yep.
I think over time you would have less irresponsible gun owners because you would have people go, wow, I have access to a gun, but they know that there's people out there with guns, and if they mess up and let's say they're careless with it and they pull out their gun and they look careless, there might be dudes out there pointing a gun at them or something going, put your gun down, what the hell are you doing? Well, now it's like, okay, there's certain states you can't open carry. In California, you can open carry, but you got to carry the magazine out on your other side. I mean, there's just like goofy laws, and it's to give you the fake warm fuzzy feeling that the government is making you safer.
Yeah,
and it's incorrect.
It is incorrect. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Wisconsin at one point you could open carry, but you couldn't conceal, as if concealing is a dangerous weapon.
Yeah, like it's right.
In fact,
Scaring
if anything,
less
I would
women
think
or
it's
something.
yeah,
in a mall.
it doesn't make any sense. And one of the original reasons, and if you look at my Minnesota carry license, it actually has a Wisconsin address, because before I even became a resident of Minnesota, I went through and got my concealed carry in Minnesota. It was one of the reasons I thought about moving here in the first place, because it moved us that closer to liberty. In Wisconsin, I couldn't even conceal. Now Wisconsin's got a concealed carry. But you don't need these laws. You just say, the state just says there's no laws against you carrying or bearing arms because you're protected by the Second Amendment.
Right.
And it's just beyond me what they're doing.
Well, people don't understand the difference either between a law and regulation. Whereas like a regulation is anything that's imposed on you that you have to abide by, and if you don't, they're going to use some sort of coercive force to either extract money from you or to get you to provide or do a certain action or refrain from a certain action.
Yep.
Whereas a law means that you have actively violated what we'd like to call the unalienable rights that can never be leaned upon. You can not put a lien upon an unalienable right. So if I point a gun at you, there might be, and I don't do anything about it, you still may be able to use the court system to remedy the fact that I assaulted you by quote, threatening you. I mean,
right.
People can't think in these terms. They go, well, if we had constitutional carry, somebody might point a gun at me, but as long as they didn't shoot me,
yeah.
well, they didn't violate my rights. It's like, well, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a very concrete system in place to formulate, what is what we'd like to call legal or illegal. And people like to go, oh, you broke a seatbelt law. And I go, there's no such thing as a seatbelt. I mean, I always wear my seatbelt, by the way. I do. But I mean, people like to say something like that. You broke a seatbelt law. And I go, there's no such thing as a seatbelt law. Yeah. There's a seatbelt regulation. Because it's a victimless crime. If there's no victim, there's no law being broken.
Even though, sadly, like case that Peter Schiff's father, Erwin Schiff,
there you go.
Victimless crimes, you
put
can
him in a
still
cage
get
for the
in
rest
prison.
of his life.
Exactly.
Erwin Schiff.
Can't imagine that. Like who would be really harmed by that. I have a little sympathy for the city people. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And I had enough touch of rural Wisconsin where my socialization with guns was hunting, and then of course I joined the military and gun clubs and stuff like that. So my socialization is different than the guy that lives in the city and has never seen a gun and any practical use for it. And their socialization with guns is they turn on the evening news and a gun crime has been committed. So over time, they are conditioned to believe that guns are bad, and I can understand that. So I have a little bit of sympathy. I don't have sympathy for people taking away rights. You don't have a right to take away my Bushmaster.
Right.
I have that right to carry a weapon to protect my family. And by the way, for these people that don't understand why someone should have a Bushmaster, I'll tell you, there is a lot of fun in shooting M4, M16 style weapons, and it's a big market. So commerce is one of the reasons why people. But I'll tell you right now, and this is coming from a guy that's been trained, the U.S. Army Infantry, that the most effective way for me to defend my home in the middle of the night, let's say intruder was coming in, is using my M4. It's got telescopic buttstock. Yep. It's very compact. I can maneuver it very simple. But guess what? If someone's breaking my home in the middle of the night, I'm going to be somewhat nervous and shaky. Holding out holding out my pistol, my 9mm, and proper procedure would have your arms fully extended. It's the correct way to shoot that weapon. It'd be a very difficult thing to do. But picking up my M4 is a nice steady object that would be the best possible way to protect myself. And guess what? That M4 is not the most powerful weapon in my house.
Is it 223, the one you got?
Yeah, 223. Yeah. My most powerful weapon in this house would actually be a 12-gauge shotgun. For me, hunting weapon.
That's my go-to for my house. If in the middle of the night I have to do something, especially if my roommates are home.
Yep. Because
my other weapons that shoot bullets can go through walls.
Yeah.
But if I have to defend my house and I think someone's coming to actually do me harm,
that's
the shotgun is the best.
That's a valid point.
Because they see guys you shoot and it goes through a wall, or even the kids in North Minneapolis, they get hit by a drive-by and they're doing their homework.
Right.
It goes through the wall. But anytime if I was in fear of my life, that's what I keep loaded. Is my 12 gauge, is because good luck, spraying that. And as long as you're past the walls, you're not getting hit. But if you're in the room trying to do me harm, you are getting hit. So.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. And this is a mistake. I mean, it's funny listening to this gun control debate because people don't know what the hell they're talking about. A .223 round is a fairly small round. That's
right.
That's what the Bushmaster is. That's what this terrible assault weapon is. A 12-gauge shotgun. Anyone could see a 12-gauge shotgun shell, and they would tell that that's a far bigger round. Up close, nothing's more damaging than 12-gauge. It's just gonna, and I would do great damage to a human body. That would be probably the most powerful weapon at close range. I also own a 300 Win Mag, which is a huge round. It's probably one of the bigger rounds you'd use on a whitetail. In fact, I call it my out west gun because it's
elk gun.
Yeah, my elk gun.
That's what my dad uses for elk in Idaho.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same gun.
It's pretty big on whitetail. That is so much more powerful. I mean, I showed someone. Actually, I wouldn't even want to show them. I'd want them to shoot those two weapons, the Bushmaster and the 300 Win Mag. And I guarantee you could shoot 20 rounds in the Bushmaster and you would have a blast, which is why people like shooting the Bushmaster. Yeah, it's a fun weapon to shoot. It's a great gun. You would not make it 10 rounds of my 300 Win Mag before you say, I cannot do anymore. This is hurting my shoulder.
Right.
It's gonna kill your shoulder. It's a powerful powerful round. It is by far more powerful than the .223 round. So I mean, this whole conversation over powerful assault weapons is just a joke.
It's all a joke. Do you see the meme on Facebook? I think it was Feinstein holding up the assault weapon, and she said something. This is dangerous or whatever. So someone in the meme had an arrow pointing to every feature of the Bushmaster. And it said dangerous, hand grip to prevent burning on the barrel. Or it said dangerous clip and then dangerous stock, so low kick or whatever. And
I've never seen that.
Oh, it's so good. It basically the whole gist, of course, was to compare it to any other hunting rifle.
Yeah.
And how everything else actually made it less dangerous.
Yeah, I mean
everything that looks quote unquote looks dangerous on a quote unquote assault rifle, which is not. It's whatever. Is actually to provide more safety or less danger.
Right.
I mean, everything on a M4 or an AR-15 or whatever you want to call it, civilian or military, is there to provide more comfort and less danger.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly it. I mean, it's a great point. It's a semi-automatic weapon. It's not a fully automatic. You don't pull the trigger and it shoots rounds repeatedly.
Continuously, right.
You have to pull a trigger. One trigger pull equals one round. That's what a semi-automatic feature is. Many hunting rifles have that feature, so do shotguns.
Yep.
The one I would give them is a 30-round magazine. Yes, it has the ability for a shooter, in a bad sense, to keep shooting and be more disastrous because they don't have to load. But you can load pretty quick, by the way, a lot of magazines.
Mm-hmm.
But that argument is so stupid because it negates the fact that it also can be used, a 30-round magazine, for some good.
To defend against this crazy dude.
Defend against a crazy dude.
Like this supposed shooter in Connecticut with two pistols, supposedly, and then the coroner said every round was a .223 round.
Or worse,
really weird.
Or worst case, as we mentioned before, a tyrannical government, which is why we have a Second Amendment. It's like saying that because vehicles that can go over 120 miles an hour are that much more dangerous. I can't really necessarily argue that point. I mean, technically, a vehicle at 120 miles an hour is going to be more dangerous when it's 60. But there are some benefits of vehicles that can go faster. I mean, more aerodynamic. I mean, that's going to be less friction, which would produce a more fuel-efficient vehicle. Or maybe a bigger vehicle like an SUV. I know there's a lot of people that don't believe SUVs should be legal, but saying that because the vehicle's so big and so much dangerous, in a collision, or if behind a drunk driver, so someone that's got bad intentions and shouldn't be driving an SUV, it's a more damaging vehicle. But we're negating the fact that an SUV is a very effective vehicle for hauling a boat, a camper, hauling more people. If you have kids. A vehicle that you could, store more items in. I mean, there's good uses for an SUV. You can
make an SUV more economical by using it in a certain way, is what you're saying, right?
Absolutely.
Throw more stuff in it. Like a bus. Why is a bus more economical?
Yeah, exactly. But imagine being, in a car collision with a semi. I mean, it is a far more dangerous or a more dangerous item than, I wouldn't say Yugo, let's say a Geo Metro, right?
Right.
But obviously, semis have a lot of good use to it. That's what we have to understand is, yes, I cannot argue the fact that a 30-round magazine or an assault weapon cannot be used in a bad way, but you're negating the fact that these weapons are also used in a good way, in a positive way. And that's what I think the gun control crowd is leaving away from the argument, is that, or they just don't see it. I don't think Diane Feinstein has any idea all the good uses of this. And you know what? It's actually pretty normal for politicians and people, government officials, to want us to not have those weapons.
Well, plus they don't need them because they're surrounded by 8 people with guns anywhere they go.
Yeah,
it's such a hypocritical.
That was my meme the other day. Did you see that?
Oh no, I didn't. Well, maybe I've probably seen a bunch of them.
I showed. I took a picture back in the day. I actually got to be part of President George W. Bush's motorcade.
Okay.
And I was driving the press around, so I was part of this big motorcade. And one thing I didn't know about the Secret Service is the Secret Service have many different factions. It's not just the dudes in the suits with the...
Sure, okay.
There's many different levels of it. They've got an EOD team.
What's that?
Explosive Ordnance Device team, so they deal with any kind of bomb threats and stuff. I mean, this is a standard package whenever the president commutes.
Okay.
They also have I think what they call a counter force team, I believe is what the term was. And these are badass dudes. They're in a black, unmarked SUV... Suburban, one of those terrible SUVs, right? And they're dudes with M4s. And I think even in the back of it, they've got like probably either a 240 Bravo, which would be a 7.62 round, or they've got maybe they got an M249, which would be another 223 round, but that's a belt-fed automatic.
Okay.
And anyhow, I mean, badass dudes,
I've
right?
seen those in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
When the president was in town.
So I snapped a picture of this. Because why? Because these guys all have assault weapons, right?
Yeah.
And they're protecting the president. And the president's life is being protected by assault weapons, yet he's telling us that we don't have a right to protect ourselves.
Exactly. And his daughters go to school with like 7 armed guards. And here's a meme that I saw that you should address. I've seen it a billion times in different format, and it basically says like, oh, you think that these are going to protect you from a tyrannical government, and it would show like pistols and then maybe like a AR-15, and then it would show like the government's fighter jets, drones with bombs and everything like that, implying that, oh, you're going to be standing on your roof with your assault weapon aiming up at the sky, and a bomb's going to blow you up if you're a domestic terrorist or whatever.
Yeah.
So my response to that, and I see it all the time, like constantly, like people think that it's a logical point. It's like, well, you got to quantify this. How many guns are in America, And I've heard that there's, 80 million gun owners, and I've heard there's like 300 million guns or something in this country.
Yep.
And so I heard if you took out 99 million, or 99% of all guns, even in a gun grab, you'd have, what would that be? 3 million guns still left in this country for, how many people? Under 300 million, right? So... I'm just saying, like, you'd still have, what would that be, 3%, I want to say. But my whole point is that the Revolutionary War was fought...
1% if you had 3 million off 300
Sure.
million. Yeah.
The Revolutionary War was fought by 3% of the people.
Right.
And they basically they were way, way technologically undermanned against the largest military force that the world has ever known.
Right.
So, and that's a scenario, I'm just trying to equalize it with my terrible math, with the Revolutionary War. So my point is that if you don't take 99% of guns out of Americans, then it's asinine to say that just because there's drones and what are they going to do? Destroy every neighborhood in every state in the United States? Right. No. If there's a tyrannical government and there are people that have to stand up to it, you have, hundreds of thousands of square miles of armed people that are going to resist the leech that is D.C. And if a couple states have terrible stuff going on, but it comes down to the household level, sure, maybe Las Vegas, L.A., New York might have some terrible things, but I guess what, Casper, Wyoming's probably going to do okay.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it, Because there's not going to be drones bombing the entire city of Casper, Wyoming, but there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people in the surrounding states that are protecting their land from the bucktooth Bob level, where they get in their truck and their house is armed, their truck's armed, their person's armed, and you're not going to be able to do anything.
And I take this from, maybe an area that I have some expertise in, and just military operations. And there's just no way they could do something like that because you would lose the populace. The tyrannical government will never be effective unless they win over a segment of the population. I mean, even Hitler had won over people and some national pride.
Times Man of the Year.
Yeah, putting people to work, rebounding the economy, providing them jobs. There were things that Hitler did to win over the population. I don't think tyrannical governments could come in and, at least from people that have known freedom, and be successful if they don't provide something for the population. Well, if the government was to turn drones on their own people, I mean, they're not going to last long, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah, or they bomb cities. And we know this in the U.S. military when we go overseas. I mean, you have to win the hearts and minds of people. You're not going to win the hearts and minds of people.
Hold that thought. I'm going to pause this right here.
Yeah.
All right, I want to ask you, we'll wrap up with some military. I'm going to pause this thing real quick. All right, so you were talking about hearts and minds, and so one thing we don't know each other too well, so one thing I wanted to talk to you about a little bit, I guess, is before we get into your experience in the military, can you at least start in high school? How about you just start there? Your thought process, who you were as a 10th, 11th, 12th grader, and then lead in, and just by you talking about hearts and minds, I guess one of the main theses here would be, I guess, can we win hearts and minds? Are we winning hearts and minds? Or is that something that is counterproductive to intellectual discussion? And
hearts and minds, are you talking about overseas?
It's a phrase that's been used so much for the average cat, like my dad, who didn't serve in the military. And by the way, I'm not saying anything bad about my dad, especially if he's listening. But, he doesn't accept, he and I think so alike now. But I'll tell you what, I remember when the wars were starting right after 9/11, he and I didn't think alike at all. First of all, I didn't know what I thought, and he was the same as every other one of my friends' dads, almost, where it was like living room couch, Fox News, CNN, didn't matter. You could watch it from your living room. You could watch war. You could watch bombs going off. You couldn't see the bodies flying and being singed and burned, but you could see the buildings exploding, and you could see the Geraldo Rivera's out there, and so it was entertaining, and it felt like we were getting a bad guy. So the feeling, I got my car broken into a couple times where I live, and it's a really nice neighborhood, or pretty nice, but it's by Southdale Mall, high traffic, and I park back in the alley.
Yep.
So my point bringing this up is when my car got broken into, I felt like I wanted to commit a violent act. If I could ever catch the thief, I would like to beat the shit out of him personally.
Yeah.
I would never do that, even if I saw it happening. But I felt that urge where I would actually get a lot of pleasure out of physically harming someone who was stealing from me.
Right.
Like I said, promise you guys, listeners, never would do that, never want to. But you know what I mean, right? You to catch a thief or to provide your own justice feels good. So I guess start in high school, and I'll just let you talk here. But I don't know, it'd be nice to get to know, I guess, where your mind was there.
Well, high school, I was, an athlete, and I did have some interest in politics. I remember, I'm 30 years old, so Bush was running in 2000, so I ended my career in high school being a Bush supporter back then. I was graduating from high school, and I remember listening to someone about the National Guard and got interested in, checking it out. And I would say my primary reason for joining the military was financial reasons.
Okay.
It gave me a way to pay for college.
Real quick, do you think a lot of people that once they were in for financial reasons, is it sort of like when you get to prison and you say, everyone in prison, they're not guilty? Yes, any prisoner, they didn't do it. Everyone I know that's in the military but not out of it would never, ever, 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 ever admit, or just freshly out, would never admit to anything financially based. Do you think there is a self-justification when you're in it that you have to say it's for pride, patriotism, nationalism?
Oh, sure, it's ingrained in a lot of lessons, but
I don't want to seem like a dick because, like,
well, I'm not trying to be the guy that goes against the grain and stuff, but quite frankly, my motivation was a way to pay for college. And it was an experience, too, that I thought was interesting. But I remember growing up, and I always thought, man, I'm never going to join the military. It's if I don't go to college and life sucks, then I'll either be a fighter pilot or I'll be a Navy SEAL. Well, then I hear about the Army National Guard and the financial reasons of joining. it was a way to pay for college. And I didn't have a reason, I mean, I didn't have rich parents, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting, and it's an experience. So what the heck? I'll join the Army National Guard, and so I signed up. And I remember the recruiter saying, "I just have to tell you, there's a chance you can go to war." Well, before 9/11, you just don't think of wars in the sense of big ground troops presence in a long time. So
you think of the Gulf War.
Yeah, it's just quite frankly, I just didn't even think of that even being in the realms of possibility. So I go off to basic training down in Fort Benning, Georgia, out of high school. It's my first experience, pretty much, away from home, and I go to the infantry school and graduate from the infantry basic course. You go to infantry basic training, you're gonna be thinking like an infantry guy. You're a trained killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am just a patriotic, red-blooded American, and then I go off to my first semester of college, and 9/11 occurs, and I really feel a call to duty in pride of being a soldier.
Yep.
So that really changed my philosophy on why I'm serving the military. And I had this real patriotic sense of duty. But being a guardsman who was going to college, there really wasn't... I wasn't being part of the overall mission. I know there was a unit in Minnesota, which I had later joined after college, that actually was activated to work at airports. But the unit I was in didn't have any piece of that. So I continued on with my college education. But because of the, post 9/11 mentality and the Iraq War, I felt this sense of, duty that, went beyond just being a tow missile gunner. And then I also noticed through some co-curriculars in college that I had some leadership skills. So I decided, let's check out ROTC. And I learned that was a pretty good program, and it actually paid for more college. So it was another financial decision. Joined ROTC at the U of M, and I got to go through the 2-year program because basic training and AIT got rid of my first 2-year commitment in ROTC because usually it's a 4-year program. Did that and got commissioned as an officer upon graduating from college.
Okay.
And so here I am, a graduate of college, entering the workforce. I was hired actually by Edward Jones, the brokerage firm. But I was first told I had to go do my officer basic course, an infantry officer basic course down in Fort Benning. So I go back down to Fort Benning, and I'm even more of a trained killer and, infantry guy. And I'll tell you, you're an infantry lieutenant coming out of officer basic course. Yeah, more than likely, at least at that time, you want to go to war. You want to go to action. In fact, all of our teachers were the captains, or teachers, or what do they call them? TAC officers. They were all guys that went over in the initial invasion. So we're hearing these stories and stuff like that, and you want to go over. So I come back and I join a Minnesota unit, and they are already going to Iraq. It's part of the 1st Brigade that actually went on a 22-month deployment. Well, they didn't have a spot for me, so I miss out on Iraq. And a year later, I get told I'm going to Kosovo against my own will.
Food's better.
Yeah. I first am like, are we even in Kosovo anymore, So I spent a year of my life as a platoon leader in Kosovo, intervening between the Albanians and the Serbs in a fight that they've been fighting for hundreds of years. This was 2007.
God.
Yeah.
And a lot of that shit was just haywire 10 years prior. And so you're even educating me big time now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically in between. And then, of course, when I'm there, the Albanians unilaterally declare independence in Kosovo, because up to that point, Kosovo was just a province in Serbia. So they declare Kosovo an independent state. And so now we're in the middle of international skirmish because the Russians don't recognize Kosovo as an independent state, but Americans do, and the French do, and it just was a disaster. So we're in the middle of this stuff.
And you're in It's the army. It's not
Army. Yeah.
I had a buddy, or have a buddy. That sounded bad when we're talking about war. He was over there, I think, with NATO.
Well, we're all NATO forces.
So so maybe he wasn't. Then. So what's the difference between the blue helmet and the non-blue helmet?
Well, NATO is a collection of different nations, and so those nations that are part of NATO will send over troops to whatever that mission is. In this case, in Kosovo, to I think we call it peace enforcement. Mm-hmm. The blue helmets are the UN.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
so but they've got a mission there as well, as interventionists and all things international. Yep. But anyhow, so we're under the NATO flag, but technically, I never had to. I did actually have to answer to a French chain of command at some points. But I'm a platoon leader there, and we were brought up from southern Kosovo to the border of Serbia, and we never were fighting in the sense that we broke out in any kind of exchange of bullets, but the French and the UN did at one point there, and my French buddy, his platoon took some casualties. And
deaths or just injuries?
Injuries and 2 deaths were.
Okay.
I think the deaths were the UN guards. So about 24 hours after that, I remember being tapped for a mission to come up with a couple Bradley fighting vehicles to reinforce the French up there along the Ibar River in Mitrovica. And anyhow, I was stationed up in the northern part for over a month, living in this little French tent camp, and going on 24-hour operations, and just, it gets to a point where you're like, what the heck are we doing here?
Right.
How's this defending American liberty?
Yeah, I was going to say, the word liberty, did that word ever did anyone ever use that word?
Maybe for Albanians, because Albanians loved us.
Okay.
The Serbs hated us because we sided with Albanians, and I had no problem with the Serbs up to that point. I came out of that country pissed off at Serbs at that deployment, pissed off at Serbs because from my vantage point, the Serbs were mean to us, and so I didn't like them. Sure. But why were they mean to us? Because our country was saying...
you crashed their barbecue.
Yeah, we crashed their barbecue. So I'm telling you, it was goofy. But anyhow, I come back, and I still have this big sense of patriotism,
Sure.
And I volunteered to go to Iraq. And at that time, Iraq was starting to... We're post-surge, and the action is starting to die down, and I'm doing a calculated estimate of if there's even going to be much chance to go to Iraq again, and I wanted to do that. I wanted that to be part of my career, and so I volunteered for a division deployment, and as an infantry trained killer, right, as an infantry lieutenant, becoming an infantry captain at that point, that's not a glorious deployment for you. You want to be the guy going on patrols, but I volunteered because it's the only thing that I could have done. And so I became a planner in an operations cell with the division headquarters. So I was briefing generals and, devising some plans for that part. So I was in Iraq in 2010 with the Red Bulls here in Minnesota as we were winding down combat operations. In fact, that happened under our watch over there. And it was a real interesting experience. So we didn't actually have much direct engagement with enemy in southern Iraq and Basra. The enemy's tactics at that point were just upset with our occupation, and our enemy really defined that area. Yeah, our enemy really defined that area were Shia, as we would call them, Shia extremists. But this is all a matter of perspective.
Real quick, dumb like me. So what about the Sunnis?
The Sunnis,
because Saddam was a Sunni.
Sunnis were not
right.
But the Shias were the predominant religion.
Yes,
sect. I guess was what you.
Yeah,
would call
correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the Shia have a larger, much larger hold, but when we helped Saddam get in there, it was a total Sunni
Yeah, but
deal.
yeah, maybe.
So once Saddam
I don't know
was
if he's even a
gone-
secular guy though.
Well, Saddam and his backers were all Sunnis, right?
Technically, he was a Sunni, yes,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I wouldn't say that. Like Al Qaeda's Sunni Muslim, but they're a fundamentalist group. I wouldn't say Saddam's really in that boat. I think he more or less was,
it was more cultural.
He was more inspired,
than idealistic.
He was more inspired by golden palaces than he is about carrying on jihad.
Right.
So anyhow, but even regardless of the makeup of all Iraq, we're in the southern province of Basra.
Okay.
And that is predominantly Shia. In fact, a lot of those guys, tribes there, don't even really see a border between Iraq and Iran.
Oh, okay.
So we experienced quite frequently while we were there rocket attacks, which would leave me either hitting the ground or in a bunker, spending 2 o'clock in the morning.
And what kind of rockets
bunker.
are these? Like RPGs, or these like...
No, these are indirect rockets. So, basically they're set up
like
on
mortar?
Yeah, basically set up on a pipe system and have a delayed timer. So basically, it's almost ingenious. These guys set them up in 24 hours. When they go off, they're long gone, and there's no way to trace them. They're very inaccurate. But while we were there, 3 guys under our command lost their life.
Jesus, yeah.
And it's just pure luck that they could even get someone. I remember one night I was walking back, or I had stayed at the office a little longer, and we came under a rocket attack, and I heard the boom real close. And when I went out to check it after we got the all clear, it was like right where I would have been walking at that time. It was point blank range. I would have been a goner.
God.
And so it comes to a point. It's you're sitting in a bunker and you're starting to ask, okay, I hate these people. These Shias, they're bombing, rocketing us, right?
Right.
I hate these people. They're trying to kill me. But why are they trying to kill me?
Right.
We're occupying their land.
It's much easier to just paint a collective, isn't it?
Yes. So once again, my life's at risk. Kosovo, I was afraid of a Mogadishu event. One specific morning, I really thought it was going to happen because our government intervened, and I was being used as someone to just get in the middle of this. And in Iraq, I'm being rocketed because our government decided to not invade Iraq. We could debate that, but stay in Iraq and have a continued presence. You come back from these wars, and a lot of guys, at least at my point in the career as a captain or majors, I think a lot of these guys are starting to question what the hell we're doing. I take it from a fiscal standpoint. If we are broke as the federal government, we don't have any ability to keep prolonging these wars because it's draining us of resources.
We're expanding some now.
Right. But I also ask this question, regardless of the conflict, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate, there is something called blowback.
There you go. CIA even talks about that.
Yeah, you cannot go into a country and not have some kind of consequence of it. If it's a legitimate war, all right, taking out Hitler, there's going to be a blowback, but that blowback is fully justified. You can use a cost-benefit analysis, But I don't know how we can really use a cost-benefit analysis right now in Iraq or currently in Afghanistan and say that the benefits outweigh the cost of, $100 billion out of our federal budget on a yearly basis, the cost of service members' lives, which are great resources for our nation in the labor sector, or anything else, long-term costs. Because what we're doing is we're essentially creating a bunch of enemies over there.
Exactly.
And I don't get why we're doing this. I think it's a big mistake by the United States government.
I would. Would you agree? I guess. How would I put it? If like the war, like the way that we're describing being in South Asia and the Middle East right now, like this, the way we're describing it is under, I would say, an acceptable framework, absent of nationalism. We're using objective claims, and we're just using. We're trying to figure out. Sure, nationalism is part of our collective, because nationalism dictates when we say we are there. We're talking about a nationalist, somewhat of a nationalist collective. But beyond that, we're trying to use, like you said, cost-benefit analysis and everything like that. So I guess, like, right after 9/11, the gas in the gas tank was nationalism. Mm-hmm. And it was at an all-time high. So have you ever seen Wesley Clark's speech when he talks about going to the White House and everyone cold shouldered him and he was a general? Yeah. And then Rumsfeld gave him 5 minutes of his time and treated him kind of briefly and then got him out of there. And then I forget who the other dude he ran into was, but he said, man, we're going to war with 7 countries, hopefully in 5 years. And he said, why? And the guy goes, I don't know. And they listed Libya, Syria, all these countries, and we could get into banking and are you trading your oil on the dollar or not? We don't have to go there right now. But what I'm saying is, like, for me, the way that my paradigm mentally on anything to do with and I do our in quotations, but people within the United States of America as a state, as a nation state, when we're over there, and like you said, using perpetual debt to fund these endeavors.
Right.
That's the correct way to look at it because it's our blood, sweat, and tears quantified being spent, or our children who haven't been born yet, blood, sweat, and tears quantified being spent on these endeavors. But the way I see it, and the real way to view it is nationalism is the fuel. Statism is the fuel. And if you look at like Goebbels and shit that were Hitler's propaganda ministers, right. And they said, you got to make the lie really big. And I know you're talking about 9/11, and I could get into that, and I'm not going to get into, like,
there was a justified purpose. Yeah.
But that's what I mean. Like, 9/11 was the nationalism gas tank filler. Yeah, you know what I mean? Because we invaded 2 countries that didn't attack us, and the only funding we know on 9/11 came from Pakistan, which is the CIA's hotbed over there. The ISI is an agent of the CIA. Set the ISI. The ISI is the only funding source we know. They wired 100,000 Muhammad Atta. All the dudes were Egyptians and Saudis, which is where frickin' ex-presidents bank their personal banking accounts, and a lot of companies store their minerals and shit with Saudi Arabia. The House of Saud was a British installment. Right. But yet we go to war with Iraq and Afghanistan. So what I'm saying is we can use U.S. dollars.
Well, we don't go to war with Afghanistan. What we end up doing is we go there for Al-Qaeda. Because I think
but who's Al-Qaeda?
Purpose. Well, it's a group. It's a jihadist
international
group. You're right.
Anonymous, semi-anonymous.
But that are training.
It's not like the Taliban.
But that are training in camps.
Well, they got monkey bars.
But see, what you're doing is you're making a good point.
Oh, thank you.
You're making because what ends up happening, regardless of justification of Afghanistan, and we could debate all day long if Iraq was justified from the get-go. What we end up doing is we turn our mission, our objectives in the country, or actually I should say our mission statement. And right now what we're doing is we're building nations. That's our mission statement.
There you go.
If they don't want to call it that, whatever.
There you go.
It's already a doctrine for captains in the army. I've seen it's part of the doctrine is how do you build a nation to eventually turn over the security to the Afghan army or the Iraqi army,
which will be funded police. By a banking arm of the global banking cartels.
Okay, I'm not going to, even if we don't get into that, this is not at all national security for the United States.
Exactly.
And that's why we have this real big problem here is we're wasting our resources for something that's really not protecting the United States. We're far better off saving these resources, bringing our soldiers back to the United States, and only engaging in legitimate missions. And there are going to be that. I mean, the thing you can ever get rid of all war is as dumb as saying you could get rid of all theft and all, people that commit violent crimes. I mean, that's just a reality of life.
Hey,
but we want to be better poised to
what do you think about this Einstein quote? I'm going to butcher it now because I'm on the spot because I preluded to it. The pioneers of a warless world are the young men and women who refuse military service.
Well, is that a reference to conscription?
Well, I believe. Well, or
I mean, if it is, because I don't believe in conscription. I believe.
Like I believe that the military is justified, but in the terms of what we use the word military for, I don't even believe that we should have a military. But I believe that in the constitutional form that they had a grip on what the military was supposed to be because it was the best example in these United States of America of a bottom-up violent force instead of a top-down violent force. And people like to take that argument that I make and say, no, you need top down, because if your superior needs you to go do something, he's got to tell you this is a direct order. If you don't do it, there's consequences. And I go, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the militia format almost, where it's a bottom up. It's like economics. The bottom up should be the power. It shouldn't be a top down monetary system. It should be a bottom up, aka free market. And I believe violence should also be a free market system.
We don't. It's an interesting point here. We don't actually have state militias hardly anymore.
And the federal and the CIA and the FBI have bragged over the last 10 or 20 years that every major militia in every state has been infiltrated by an intelligence agency. They've said that, which freaks me out. Because like I got guys that are pro Second Amendment and they're like, yeah, militia this. And I'm like, yo, I'll be gun talk all day, but militias scare me for the fact that I don't think that they can exist under the state paradigm we live in anymore.
What I mean is, though, with state militias is what people would say it's the National Guard.
Okay.
They actually really, the National Guard today is...
It's not the National Guard anymore, is it?
It's a reserve force for the Army.
Right.
Because the funding comes from the federal government or from the Pentagon. In fact, it's been a big point in it, and then it was recently addressed, and the National Guard now has a 4-star general that sits on the on the Joint Chiefs. Well, that doesn't make sense. If you think about a state militia, they should not be part of that Joint Chiefs. They're not part of the National Army, but that's what they are. I think technically when they want to deploy a National Guard unit, the governor has to release the unit to the federal army or to the president under his command. But that never, no governor's not done that. And I remember during the debates on the, I guess it would have been debt ceiling debate a couple of years ago, where they thought the federal government was going to shut down. I remember drill being canceled.
Oh, really?
To be preempted because they didn't think they would be able to pay the soldiers.
Really?
Well, it turns out they came, because they always do this. They have a last-minute deal.
Yeah,
they always have a last-minute deal.
Yep, the park rangers get their paychecks, dude.
So we ended up drilling on that Sunday, and all was good again, restored. But it was the federal government shutdown that would have shut down the state guard. How does that work out?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I'm losing the timeline here, but eventually, whether it was a couple months later, Minnesota had a budget crisis, and guess what? Minnesota shuts down its government, and would that last half a month or something like that?
Yeah, or maybe even a whole month. Didn't
affect the National Guard at all, because the Title 32 money is coming from the federal government. Well, if the federal government's funding your state militia, you're really just trace for the money.
Who are you working for?
Yeah, who are you working for? And this actually happens all over the boat. Why can states not have 18-year-old drinking age? Because
that's the road money.
Yeah, road money.
Reagan did that, didn't he, with the highway money?
How about administering Medicaid and welfare programs? Comes from the federal government. It's not like the federal government has some magical tree. They get it from the people. It's just it's like you gotta send
it's like you gotta send your caravan of gold chests in a horse-drawn carriage all the way to Washington, and then they gotta inspect every piece, and then they gotta send back a little less.
How is that efficient government?
No, I know. And then they gotta tell you that if you're against that, that you're against the people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm for the people. I'm against that.
I know.
But it's like you can't. That's.
Yeah, I know. We don't even need to debate libertarianism, half the time, because libertarianism can apply to all forms of government. Let's just debate the good old states' rights issue. If we didn't have this convoluted system where everything gets decided at the federal government.
By the way, I don't like the term states' rights.
Okay.
Because only individuals have rights, natural rights.
Yeah, but the states' rights come
that argument, right? Yes. I wasn't saying, respect me and my opinion. I was saying as devil's advocate.
Sure, but per our Constitution, the 10th Amendment, rights not are given to the federal government or to the people in the states.
Do they call them states, right?
Yeah, the rights are guaranteed to people and the states. That's what it says. So that's what the argument would be. I can follow your logic here. And like I said, I'm not getting the libertarian argument, which is what you're doing right now. Right. Let's just bring it to a states' right issue, or as Thomas Jefferson would have said, leaving the presidency, even at a local level, because states might be too hard to decide this stuff. We're so much more efficient in the government, because if a overtaxing or oppressive government is at the local level, we can go talk to our mayor and city council members because they're neighbors.
There you go.
Or worst case scenario, that you're not effective in the political process, far easier to move city to city or even state to state. than it is to leave the country. And that's a sad system. So we don't even really need to get to some of those arguments about libertarianism. Let's just get to the argument about the federalism of states' rights. Get the government less centralized, and we're living in a much better country. And then, therefore, we could live in Wyoming and actually use gold and silver in exchange than being, forced to use,
we think
Federal Reserve note.
Most of our stuff that we think is we're very parallel. Most of the stuff. What scares me, I guess I hate to prelude anything, what scares me, but honestly, I think that before any of these ideas we see manifest themselves of ways in which liberty, especially local over national or the smallest local level, ways we see liberty come back, I think that we're actually going to see massive encroachment of global government by force before we can see any of this stuff, which is why I think stuff like this, just talking, while we can do it, we might as well get around and buy $150 recorder and go try to talk to people about it, because it's freaky. If you really looked at UN Agenda 21 at all, like the gun grab and all that stuff, it's conspiracy, and I go, okay, we get back to the definition of conspiracy and say, well, yeah, you're right, it is a conspiracy. Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up. Let's talk about it. But honestly, a lot of this stuff is sustainable development, global warming, whatever. There is an actual objective debate. Okay, is global warming real? Let's bring in 10 scientists to Duesenberg's office and we'll talk about it. But at the same time, you can have the political you can have the political discussion without the objective discussion, and you can say, well, what is happening and where are these driving forces coming from? Are they coming from the people or are they not? And let's even look at school shootings or anything. There's a blatant, whether we know what happened or not, or we ever will know on these shootings, Colorado or Connecticut or not, because everything's botched up on them. Whatever story is official, no one really knows. I swear to God, because I've looked at every single one. I'm not saying I know more than anybody, but
I think that's natural. The media reporting.
Well, of course, but I'm saying this stuff. Here's my macro point. My macro point is that the media rollout superseded all these heinous things that are going on. The media rollout was injecting steroids into everything and then putting it in a certain light, and whether it was conservative or liberal, sure, the views are different, but the key point is the talking points are the same.
Yeah.
In the massive corporations, what do they say now? There's 6 or 7 corporations in the United States that own all media or something like that you can find on any TV anywhere. Or I forget, I'm just making up statistics now, whatever. But no, that's what I heard. 6 or 7 corporations own it all. And the talking points remain the same, and they do not promote actual objective analysis, because they don't focus on, do you own yourself? Is this how does this affect liberty? No, it's always well, the Constitution says this, and then here's the stupid red herring argument. Is the Constitution set in stone, or is it a living, breathing document? That's the stupidest argument I've ever heard.
It's called the amendment process. That's the living part of it.
Well, there you go. And the thing is it's just human beings writing down on parchment paper saying, okay, we have this Western idea that was documented in the year 1215 in England in the Magna Carta, saying wow, we aren't owned by collectives anymore. We own ourselves. Right. And so as humans participate in this Western notion, especially, it was global now with the internet, that, wow, man, I don't have to worship a collective anymore. I don't have to worship a king and queen. I don't have to worship the Khmer Rouge, even though they're going to kill half the population. Because I know now with the internet or whatever that, holy crap, my parents had it rough, my grandparents had it rough, but you know what? Now everyone's on the same page with self-ownership.
Yep.
And that's the way I see it. And that's why I want to talk about at least your deployment and all that kind of stuff over there, because it's man, if we're setting up new collectives, then all we're doing is just putting new brand stickers on restrictions of self-ownership, is what I'm trying to say. The Vatican is smaller than our new base in Iraq. The biggest base in the world. Correct me if that statistic's wrong, I probably saw on the internet, but that's what the U.S. base in Iraq, in Baghdad, is supposedly bigger than the Vatican. It's the most permanent base that's ever been built in the world.
The embassy in Iraq?
Yeah.
I know it's costly. It's $1 billion. I don't know. I was only up in Baghdad for about a week, so, and at that point they hadn't built it. I believe it was in the green zone is where that was going up, and
sure.
I couldn't speak to it. I just know it's $1 billion cost item in the budget. But you're right. We're getting even more further removed from the individual, and there is definitely a concerted effort to consolidate power at even bigger than the national government or the federal government, and have it in some kind of world body, whether that's the World Bank or the UN. Wasn't it? Who was that? I don't know if it was the SecDef or the chairman or Admiral Mullen that was testifying in front of Congress or something like that, and saying that we could deploy soldiers by a UN. UN Security Council.
Yeah,
or NATO or something like that.
And that was different too recently when we talked about. That's not the same thing I'm thinking of when they basically said that they will, and this is quotes, inform Congress.
Yeah.
Is that the same
that
thing?
That was the same thing.
Yeah. When they basically said Congress is going, what are you going to let us know? What? Come on, we're supposed to be the legislative body. We're supposed to be We're supposed to be the voice of the people.
Wars. Exactly.
We declare wars, and then the guy just basically goes, "Well, I mean, you're right. We're going to inform you." like that was an acceptable answer, even though it was probably the most treasonous thing I've ever heard.
I know, right? It is so treasonous, or the fact that in the NDAA that the government could indefinitely detain a citizen.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Declaration of Independence states that as one of the abuses of the tyrant in England, and yet we are willing to throw that into legislation, and it gets debated and overwhelmingly supported to the opposite. I mean, I think it was like 85 people voted against Rand Paul's amendment.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
And I know so many people that declare themselves conservatives because they're Republican minds. Yeah. And like back to what I was saying in the beginning with the people at these work functions. And a lot of them, you know, relatives of mine too and stuff. And they're like, yeah, I'm a Republican. Okay. And then I'm a conservative. And I go, no, you're not. Yeah. You know, I'll let you call yourself a Republican, but don't ever sit there and tell me you're a conservative.
I got sympathy for people like that because I was a lot in that boat, you know, because... And I use this wrong.
But I just meant they support like the NDAA.
Right, because you think it's a patriotic thing to support your government. But really the term patriot in American history context is actually to fear or to actually go against your government, is to fear the oppressiveness, tyrannical state of a government power. And I mean, I think we get a little blindsided on things like that, thinking, "Oh well, our government couldn't be bad, so I support this because it's only going to be done like against really bad dudes, right? Like kind of like the president's ability to assassinate people. Yeah, it's only going to be used against real bad dudes. And guess what? You know what? When you open up that door, yes, probably in the next 10 years, only used against bad dudes. But guess what? That's opening a door for some abuse by the federal government.
Already has, man.
Yeah, it has. Because
Anwar al-Awlaki and his kid are the best example.
His kid.
They never did anything to violate anyone's rights, but they were declared the most heinous criminals ever because of their internet postings. And his kid, I don't even think was guilty.
Well, Awlaki was a bad dude, but his kid wasn't.
Why?
Well, I would assume he was a bad guy. I don't know. I'm not going to argue that.
Oh, no, that's
But let's assume he's a bad guy.
I'm not trying to prove you right or wrong. I'm just saying he was indicted because of, or he was, killed because, I mean, this was a dude who dined at the Pentagon at one time. He was inciting violence was the claims about him, but it was all because of shit he wrote on the internet. And I'm like, hold on now, like, there's a lot of stuff that I'll support, especially if it's a violent measure against a violent person, because then you're supposed to stop the violent person with just enough violence to stop them.
Right.
But I'm like, the First Amendment documents the fact that you can say whatever you want as long as you don't say, like, hey, I'm coming over at 5 p.m. to shoot you in the face. Like, that's a threat against your life. But if you're sitting there talking about American imperialism and about some other collective being right and American imperialism being wrong and then justifying violence against America, okay, maybe there's a case where you can apprehend him through force and then try him for some kind of crime. But now we're just killing him and his kid.
Exactly, and that's the important part. Why are we getting away from trying people and giving these people due process under law? In fact,
that's the main macro point right there. Yep.
Yeah, in fact, last I checked, that's American history in a nutshell. Wasn't the tyrant in England not allowing our people to have trial by jury?
There you go.
I mean, come on, this is just basic 101, American history 101. So,
well, let's transition to any sort of solutions because I don't have any, so I don't know if you do. But honestly, besides like the fact that the internet is the great like here. Remember the gun, the great equalizer. I have a
Independent
saying,
journalists like you guys.
Thank you, man. You're a nice guy. No, but like the gun being the physical equalizer. I have a saying that I always say, and I don't know if I stole it from somewhere, but I just think I made it up myself. But I always talk about, okay, if the gun is the great physical equalizer,
Yep.
as to the internet is the great intellectual equalizer.
Yeah.
And so I'm always talking about, okay, the gun is yes, it's a manifestation of a tool to protect your life, right?
Yep.
Simple as that. We agree, obviously, and hopefully people listen. Maybe we brought some clarity to this, maybe we didn't, but obviously you and I are in 100% agreement on that. Hopefully, if we can keep the internet free, which we're already failing in a global level to do that,
Yep.
by far, especially even in this country. If you could theoretically keep the internet free, hopefully that would be the greatest cause for liberty ever.
Oh,
So that-
absolutely.
you know what I'm saying with this, though, right? I mean,
yeah, because what we really need to do is implement thoughts in people's minds. You know, that's the beauty of freedom, is it's just full of all these wonderful thoughts, and there's no way to put these thoughts in people's minds. And when I say thoughts, I'm talking about the thought of being a free person.
right.
There's no way to bring those thoughts to these people unless we have a mode to transport it from the people that hold the thoughts, you know, whether it was the Austrian scholars or the, libertarians or Tea Partyists, you know, if we get rid of internet, because quite frankly, the media is not doing a job for us in, you know, transitioning these thoughts to, you know, people that are willing to hear it. And, you know, I really worry about these, you know, bills like SOPA and PIPA that are trying to regulate the internet. All these bills and regulations trying to stop, you know, the free exchange of thoughts with talk radio, which I think is a better medium of transferring, and then free education, school choice, and alternate forms of education, which you see being threatened on a daily basis. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the good thing is, you know, going forward, if we have a chance to restore liberty, and relatively speaking, America is still a free place compared to other nations, but we're losing our liberty on a daily basis.
Big time.
In order to restore, well, it's even hard to say restore, but to move more towards the liberty perspective as a nation, we need to keep these mediums of exchange of thoughts open and free, and the internet's probably the most effective tool. In fact, I don't even hardly get most of my news by turning on a TV anymore. It's by filtering it through different
I can't watch
websites.
TV news. I don't watch. I mean, I never, ever do I watch it, and when I do, it's usually muted, and then it's just to watch just whatever's flying by, you know?
Yeah.
Or like an airport or something like that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I basically follow a trend in a mental sense, meaning like, okay, maybe there's a lot of crap that I see out there on Iran or something.
Yep.
So then I will just physically search for more news just by typing Iran in and then hitting news.
Right.
And then reading what the heck's going on, and then I go, oh, and then Syria is doing, and I hit type in Syria. So it's it's just like the coolest free market way to get knowledge now. And if our kids wake up one day and it's just gone, I mean, what a weird place are we right now, where realistically, if Washington, D.C., and I'm talking about both sides of the aisle, if the majority of Washington, D.C. has their way, and these major negative trends that we're seeing go on, it's a very good possibility that our kids are going to wake up without the right to defend themselves at all, and without the right to seek information in a free format. And those are like the two most important things to make a human human, is basically if you wake up and you got a leaf over your genitals and you got a stone and a club, and you go out and then they deprive you of the stone and the club, and then they deprive you of actually going out and interacting with people and elsewhere, you know, they form a boundary around you, then you're pretty much a prisoner, you know? Yeah. But I don't know, without the internet, I mean, the internet is absolutely the only thing in my life that is responsible for me gaining my knowledge.
That's a valid point, yeah.
I mean, growing up, I had amazing grandparents, amazing parents, everything, but my knowledge was subjected to their specific lane.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, it was their perspectives, and I had my own perspectives, but they were because
or what
my
you're taught
brain,
in the schools.
Which
that. we had talked about earlier with economics, it's heavily slanted towards just Keynesian economics, and that's where I think my personal experience with what you're saying, really reaffirms what you're talking about. Is I went up through the system of schools because my dad and mom didn't really understand economics much, so my education in economics was really done through the school system, and I did not learn about the Ludwig von Mises Institute or the Austrian scholars unless it was for the internet.
Exactly.
If it wasn't for like things like YouTube and other social media and being able to Google something, I never would have learned about this stuff, or at least unlikely learned about it, even though the Mises Institute, I think, was commissioned in the 80s, How about a guy like Ron Paul, who I think we're both fans of Ron Paul?
He's one of the biggest catalysts in my entire life.
Yeah, imagine...
Because, you know why? Because I thought he was crazy, because I had a couple friends who liked him, and I spent a whole year reading his stuff, dismissing him, based off of a perspective I formed about knowledge. Yeah. And then after I challenged myself for about a year, I finally just went, I can't lie to myself anymore.
Yeah.
That's what hit me,
But imagine, I mean, Ron Paul wasn't new to the political scene in the last 5 years, because I didn't start following Ron Paul until 2007, and I've been really active in politics since 2000. It's not like he was new to the scene. I mean, he's been a congressman since the 70s. I mean,
yeah,
it's just true. How do you know about guys like that? And he's got an ability, his thoughts, or there's an ability to transfer his thoughts to my mind through a free internet, and it's done in many different ways. I personally like learning from YouTube, and because then I can search certain individuals, and then I like the visual and audio aspect of it. But I mean, being able to go on Amazon and buy a book, or being able to Google someone's name and learn more about it, it's just fascinating. And you're right on the money. I mean, if we didn't have freedom in the internet, I fear the direction this country is going to go.
It's freaky. I mean, how much on like Amazon books, how much on the reviews? Do you sit there sometimes and just read everyone's review of a book?
No.
Oh, you don't do that?
No,
That's what, I was just assuming you were going to disagree with me on that.
No.
Dude, you type in a book, like any book. Like type in a book on, have you heard of The Roosevelt Myth by, I think it's John T. Flynn? There's not a lot of books about FDR that have ever been published that actually attack every bad thing he ever did, because it's one of the most religious. Are you looking for one?
Well, I got Burton Folsom Jr.'s New Deal or Raw Deal.
When was that published?
Oh, this is probably a couple of years ago.
Oh, so okay. This is from.
This would be one.
No,
mine's
the
from
other.
Like the this 40s. Would be the other book that would agree.
Yeah. All right, I'll have to read that. But mine's from mine's on my toilet. And it's like the best. It's a really long book.
Yeah.
But it's like every day you got to go to the toilet or something. It's like, oh, let me. It's like, what are these crazy FDRites gonna do now? And it's a guy, John T. Flynn, and he documents like to a T. Tom Woods is a huge fan of this book, and it's one of the only major books that's ever been written that goes through like every single thing that FDR did chronologically, and it talks about why he did it, and it goes through all these guys who influenced him, and it goes through like exactly what was documented at certain meetings. And anyways, my whole point, I guess, is like I discovered that book because I was looking at other American history type books or this or that, and if you go to a book and you go, like even this recorder that we're recording this with, like I looked at a billion of those, I ordered that on Amazon, and I looked at a ton of stuff, and it just seemed, after all the reviews, there's always going to be a couple 1 stars, and there's going to be a lot of 5 stars and some 4 stars, or whatever. And so for books, it was funny because, like, you know who Howard Zinn is? He's like a liberal. He's one of the most famous American historians. He just died a couple years ago.
Okay.
And when I was in college, I was forced to read like these crazy, like borderline communist books, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed and borderline Marxist stuff. And back then, I didn't know how to like dichotomize liberty versus tyranny or collectivism versus individualism. I just knew what each professor told me was almost like right and wrong. And so back then, I wasn't buying books on Amazon. So I would just read the book and then just accept, okay, this premise is this premise, and I wouldn't analyze the premise. I would just analyze the whole book's solutions and elaborations. And so the whole point is, like, the Roosevelt myth they don't, I don't know if they still publish it, but there's a million used copies that you can get.
Yeah.
And I found it because I would read these reviews, and then some guys, I would click, this one's got a lot of like 1 and 2 star reviews. So I click specifically on the 1 star reviews or specifically on the 2 star reviews. And all these people are like, this is just brainwashing. And these guys would write like a 5-paragraph, 10 sentences in each paragraph review of whatever book I was thinking about buying. And they're like, read John T. Flynn's The Roosevelt Myth. And I saw that so many times on Amazon reviews, just from people that read a book, got so angry they read it, went back to where they bought it, threw their 2 cents in. And it wasn't censored. Like, there's Facebook pages that were Republican pages during this last election that would comment all the time.
Yeah.
And I would get blocked. Like I was a freaking liberal or something. And I'm sitting there like 90% agreeing with a lot of this stuff, and then they get all statist on me, and I'd be like, this is a fallacy of the argument. You're arguing this, and really you're just arguing collectivism, and your whole point's supposed to be individualism, and so they just banned me. And so without the restriction of information, it's like I would have never been able to understand what FDR did, and I still haven't finished the book. I got a lot more bathroom breaks to take. But but it's just amazing because it's just pure freedom of information, and you're not going to find the Roosevelt myth in a college economics class unless
because they prop them up
or college history. It's just unbelievable. The Lincoln and the FDR stuff that I read my whole life, I just accepted it because a teacher that was much older than me told me that this is the way it was, and I never questioned it. And now the last 5 years of my life, I've probably gained as much knowledge as I have for the first 20. Yeah. And it just blows my mind, and because most of that is the internet. And so for me, it's like, how do you fight? And like all this podcast, everything, it's going on the internet. But if it starts to get restricted, like recently, supposedly Facebook's been, anyone who posts like a lot of this crazy gun stuff on the pages that are not personal pages.
Yeah, I don't think that was true though. I had talked to Sean Wright about that. And
did you really?
Yeah, and I think it was, I don't think it had something to do with that.
Was it just offensive pictures maybe or something?
Yeah, offensive picture.
Well, either way, I just know that there's a lot of blowback.
The tendency is to go that way, though. You're right.
Sure.
The tendency is for government to stop this free exchange of thoughts. And because our thoughts, which are prevalent in this 2-hour or so podcast today, are going to be transferred to somebody, and they're going to think about their right to their liberty, and the government does not want people realizing that. They have an objection to what we talk about a lot in this podcast. In fact, that's the reason for government to fear us, right? But so I think the tendency is for there to be some kind of censorship in the internet, because it is such a good vocal point for libertarian viewpoint.
Well, we can wrap this thing up here. But do you believe in censorship?
Oh no, of course not.
Good man.
Well,
that's a good answer. Then we can elaborate. Sure, like you got to censor your kids from certain stuff.
But that's
that's not. You don't believe in coerced censorship in the sense where like society should have a body restricting it from peaceful exchange of information, ideas.
No, I think
even like porn.
No, I don't think it's the role of government to do it.
Exactly.
I do believe it's the role of parents to do it.
Or individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Adam Kokesh out there, he was doing something one time on, I think it was even recently, but about like why the internet might never be overtaken by any government.
Yeah.
And it's because of porn. Because like they tried to shut it down in Egypt and some of these other countries, and everyone would start putting it back up because even like the most corrupt, statist, violent oppressor, like everyone needs internet porn. And it's it's like 90% of the internet, or like it's a huge quantifiable amount of the amount of anything on the internet that's porn related. And so they said it's like the one thing that will never let the freedom of information stop is porn. Because even these tyrannical governments try to shut it down and it goes right back up. Because
so you're saying our libertarian viewpoint, if they are able to censor us on just Facebook and other social media, we have to use porn as the venue then? have an educational porn video?
I was going to say, you have to like, it'll be like Leonardo da Vinci. He'll have his like hidden political things painted in the background of his paintings. Like I went to the Louvre with a buddy of mine that was an art major, and I was like, that's a crazy painting. And he's like, yo, and this dude, one of my best friends ever, and he was like, baggy shorts, hoodie, just looked like wouldn't fit in at the Louvre. Everyone's, from the rest of Europe mainly. Sophisticated. And he's like, yo, in this painting, see how she's holding the skull up by the hair? That's because it represented this. And I'm like, holy shit, oh my God, dude. And he knew everything about everything because he had to study it in his major. Yeah. And I was like, that was back in the day. That was how they did it, and now we don't understand. We just think that it was pretty, it was aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but back then, you couldn't say certain things because they'd kill you. And so you had to put it in a painting so someone 80 years later would figure out your entire message, and you were already gone.
Yeah.
And so that's funny that you're joking about the porn thing, but it's, I don't know, the saving grace, there's always examples through tyranny of humanity.
Right.
That movie Life is Beautiful, whereas the guys in the concentration camp, I think that was called, right? Life is Beautiful. Yeah. Concentration camps, and they depicted so many human, beautiful emotions, the guy and his son and family, within the most heinous thing of the last 100 years, or one of the most heinous things that have ever happened. And so for me, there's a lot of examples out there where no matter how bad it gets, a lot of people see the stuff I post on Facebook or the art that I do. Right. A lot of my rap music kind of dark, a lot of minor chords. I say a lot of controversial things. But my friends, every day I'm just laughing and joking and whatever. I'm always just having a good time. And I think I hope that that's the right way to be. You have to live every day like it's your last day. But that doesn't mean that you should be afraid of digging into this really deep, dark stuff, because I think that's kind of what the spirit of humanity is. You got to enjoy the good stuff, but if you're afraid to go down the dark holes, then whatever's in that hole is going to keep getting bigger and worse and worse and worse. You got to face it head on. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
You want to do a plug for JD Funds real quick? Duesenberg here, straight out of the east suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul. How long you been doing what you do?
Actually, I only opened my company about a year ago.
Okay.
I used to be a broker with a big brokerage firm. I started J. Duesenberg Financial because I looked at the advice that the big brokerage firms were giving their clients or giving to their advisors or their brokers, and they weren't telling people the story that needs to be told. There is a huge problem with running budget deficits. It's monetized, it's passed on to future taxpayers, and it's creating a serious problem in the United States. It's leading into a bond bubble that's going to implode once interest rates go up. I noticed, since I had this viewpoint and no one else was really talking about it, I had a niche that I could bring to the marketplace. And so what I do is I advise clients to protect their wealth for this given point, but I also find good places to put their wealth so they can get some current growth. But basically what I do is protect people's wealth, whether that's a 401k or just an IRA or some kind of brokerage account, in order to stave off the massive problems that are coming up here in the bond market, and then also to keep their growth to at least pace or outperform the rate of inflation. So that's what I do in a nutshell. My website's jdfunds.com. J as in Jake, D as in Duesenberg, funds.com. You can see my commentary on there. You can see, usually I have a financial story every morning that's updated in my Facebook account, it's updated in my Twitter account, and basically a good resource for learning about investing and then economics.
All right, man, that was a great plug. Well, hey, I appreciate you sitting down and doing this. Hopefully we reach some minds out there that we've at least made think about different angles on some stuff that's very pressing in the immediate future, not only in this country but in the world, and in the search for liberty in a system where I think the one thing about humanity, any point in history, all the most brilliant people of the world have been people that have fought against a coercive collective. Whether it was Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, what's the main theme that keeps these people as unique individuals? And as they, within themselves, held on to a deeper truth that other people didn't have, and they found a way to share it with the rest of us. And sometimes they had to paint a painting that people wouldn't look at for 50 or 100 years, and sometimes they went out in the town square until someone actually cut their head off. So I think that the macro thesis of everything that is on Mage, music, podcasts, whatever, is to get whether it's like-minded people or not, is to get people together to discuss everything in the context of individual liberty and how we can actually free the individual. And I hope that what I said with you right there, you kind of at least agree with my macro principles. And as we get smarter and get older, hopefully we get smarter as we get older, but hopefully we grow within the context of fighting for liberty. And the oldest dichotomy in the world, I think, is liberty versus tyranny. To me.
Well, when I debate with people about politics, what it comes down to, usually, if I have a lot of disagreements with people, is I say, I am arguing the viewpoint of liberty. You're arguing against liberty. And I think people really want to be on my side of the issue.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what
I'm saying. If you think I'm
a
bad guy because I don't believe, in welfare, run by the federal government, I take that viewpoint because I believe in liberty. Welfare is only provided by stealing money from productive members of society and reallocating it. I believe in individual rights. Okay? And if you want to fault me for that, then so be it. I sleep well at night because I always stand on the side of liberty.
There you go. We stand on the side of liberty. Team Mage Podcast, Jake Duesenberg. We're out. Thanks for listening. Peace.